Okay. Gang, hello, hello, hello. Welcome to yet another episode of Whick TV. This is the second stream I'm doing today. We had a great show earlier with Brianna Wu and Maud, and they had a wonderful debate. And today, right now, we're going to be discussing some film criticism, okay? We're going to be talking about movies, about cinema. There's a lot to discuss here. I have gathered some great movie critics to talk about it with us. And yeah, I guess we're just gonna kind of see where it goes. I wanted kind of a more chill, relaxed show today, and these ladies were kind enough to join me. So thank you for being here. Um, but yeah, we're gonna talk about movies. So Maeve, you're the one that originally approached me about this topic. Um, why don't you start us off? Talk about a little bit what you think about cinema today. Go ahead.
Yeah, we were talking last week, and I think we were both imagining a slow news week in general. So we were like, well, Gladiator 2's trailer just came out, and that's pretty big. I bet people will be talking about that all week. And they should be. Um, so here we are doing that because I think like it came out last week and it had a day of everyone chatting about how bad it was. But the commentary around why it was bad was really like interesting because it had everything to do from the Jay-Z rap in the middle of the trailer to the casting of Denzel Washington, to the general like idea of why do they even make a sequel to this movie, to the big budget that was put into it, to Ridley Scott already kind of failing in his like legacy with Napoleon not doing so well. So it was a whole like mishmash of really interesting critique that was happening all at once. And I kind of was thinking about like how we would like think about what like each of the critiques are, but in the kind of larger framework of movies in general having a bad time right now, because I think a lot of people think they are, with the notable exception of Dune, and also Oppenheimer and maybe Barbie to an extent. We've had very few movies that people are all agreeing on were like good to excellent. And I think there's a lot of critique around the kind of like poorness of quality coming out from Hollywood right now. And I know people will say, well, this is the last thing we need to think about right now. We have like 10 million better things to think about. But I do think that film plays a really important like part of our life, whether it be like in the movies or whether it be like on Netflix. It still is like a kind of a cultural cornerstone about how we frame our society, where we are, our identities. And a lot of the apocalyptic movies coming out also having this kind of dystopian feel about them and that kind of playing into how we see our real lives now. I know AI movies have had that kind of effect. Everyone's seeing AI as evil, and all the movies about AI always being evil. There's a very few like AI saves the day movie. So I think, but going back to the Gladiator one, I just thought there was a lot of like interesting critique around that. I think for me, one of the I'm just going to start off with what I found really interesting was people saying was historically inaccurate, by casting Denzel Washington, which I think is really funny because it just goes into the idea of the Little Mermaid again. Here we have a black actor playing in what you think is a white movie. Why do you think it's a white movie? Why would Denzel Washington be historically inaccurate? Because if you know your history, actually Roman Empire back then had a lot of different ethnicities. And what he plays, his role as a kind of a lower serf or civilian, maybe not even a citizen of Rome, he very well could have been North African. You know, that character very well could have been black. But yet, people having this problem about a black character and what we know and define as a white movie, that is a kind of an interesting critique. Also, the idea of like the music being like Jay-Z. I know like rap music obviously is very new. You can't claim that they had rap music back then, but they definitely didn't have Hans Zimmer. So it's just like the kind of interesting critiques of why it's wrong. And I think, yeah, I just kind of wanted to touch on that a little bit,
Well,
because again, we had The Little Mermaid, and that came out the year before last or last year, and that was, I mean, I feel so sorry for that poor actress who played that girl because that was such an unfair backlash. And I just seeing this being repeated over and over and over again. So I'm just wondering like what the thoughts on that are and any kind of input.
Sure, and I'm curious what Fairy Queen has to say. But I guess before we get to her, I just want to ask you directly, right? Because you mentioned in there, right, that you think that movies just suck in general these days, or at least that's the zeitgeist, is that movies are just
Mm.
not performing well. And I guess I'd just ask you bluntly, in your opinion, why?
Wow. I mean, like, I think that's going to be a conversation. I think there's a lot to do with how we feel about the quality of the storytelling and also the repetitiveness of the storytelling. So, like, having sequels to Marvel movies over and over and over again. And I think Matt Damon said it best when he was on Hot Wings, when he was talking about the fear of failure in Hollywood right now, that there's such a fear of failing, a fear of not getting the box office tickets, that people aren't making like good films or dangerous filmmaking. They're playing it safe. And playing it safe is appealing to, I guess, the teenage boy audience and the teenage boys who've grown up. And I don't think it's wrong to make some Marvel movies. I don't think it's wrong to make fantasy and sci-fi that is like kind of around like Avengers or even like Star Warsy stuff. But to have only that and to have poor qualities of that is something that I see going wrong. And also just not having like more, I guess, interesting storylines around love, around like identity, and just keeping the very samey. And I know that Fairy Queen is going to have a lot to say about like sexuality in movies and the lack of that going on too. And that's another thing. So people are looking to see something interesting and they're just seeing boring, normal,
Okay,
repetitive things with the exceptions of some movies. Yeah.
let's toss it
Yeah.
to Fairy Queen and get some of her thoughts. I'm really curious.
I have a lot of thoughts and there's a lot of stuff to go over, but I want to specifically talk about the trailer first. And I agree with you and I disagree with you. I think that like I have mixed feelings. So for this specific trailer and this specific one, I am completely on board with you, both because like it is historically accurate to have a black actor playing as a Roman character, like that would make sense. Okay, and that might not appeal to like the majority of audiences like to hear that, but it's simply a fact. And if you don't like it, you should crack open a history book and see it. And you're absolutely right. Like I don't think that like having a rap song like in a historical documentary, I don't think that that necessarily takes anything away from it. Now having said that, I haven't the question is, does it work? And the honest answer is, I don't know because I haven't seen the full trailer. So the honest
Mhm.
answer, and I know that that's subjective, but the question is, like when I sit down to listen to it, it's in the pudding, right? Do I buy it, right? Does it sound good? Does it fit with like the vibe of like what's happening on the screen? That would be the question. So I agree with you that I also agree with you with the Little Mermaid. There is no reason at all why a black actress could not play the Little Mermaid. Okay, there's nothing in the character that says that she couldn't. In fact, like to a degree, it would almost make a certain degree of sense, especially like if it's it depends like where we're located, right? So sure, like I would agree with you on both of those things. I veer off a little slightly in some other representations of media. So one example would be the Cleopatra documentary that was produced on Netflix. That to me is different, and it's different to me because I think that the Egyptians had a legitimate critique of the idea, not just merely that Cleopatra was black, but that the other characters that were presented like as Egyptians within the film, because it's probably true historically that there were black Egyptians that existed within ancient Egypt. But we know for Cleopatra, and we know that she was Greek. We know that like she was the descendant of Ptolemy. We know that she married her brothers. We know that her brothers and sisters were Greek. She probably looked Mediterranean. That's honestly, she probably looked Mediterranean, and that's honestly how she probably looked and portrayed. And I think that it's different. I reject the notion that it's this quite the same. I don't think it's the same as whitewashing, but I do think that like if you are from Egypt, right? I do think it means something to say that this is ancient Egyptian culture and you do want to portray Egypt because it's specifically for people who are from that region, right? I do think that there is something to that degree. I also think that sometimes, in some cases of portrayals of media, so Bridgerton would be an example of this, okay? When I sit down to watch Bridgerton, I want to love Bridgerton, okay? And I do love Bridgerton. I like some of the stories and I like some of the narratives that come on. I think it's really fun. I went to a Bridgerton ball. It's a fun show to participate in, okay? Until they turn the music on, okay? The music is where they lose me. And the reason, and so for those of you who have seen Bridgerton, you'll know that there are scenes like in the ballroom where they take rap music, or they take like very modern
Mhm.
examples of music, and they make it sound, they play it to strings basically. And it doesn't, there's something about that that doesn't work for me, and I don't know
Mhm.
why. I don't know if that's simply like bias for me. Something about that takes away from the film, right? For me, from the series, for me, I think that like the point of the series, as I understand it, which I think is a really good point, is to try to help black young women especially to be able to see themselves like represented in films like Pride and Prejudice, like Jane Eyre, like
I
the
wanna
aesthetic of the old Victorian, and I understand that, and I think that that's a good thing, and I'd like to see more of that. But there is something about the music that does irk me. Like I do understand that.
I
So.
wanna I wanna interject just a moment, right? Because you said something that I think might be indicative of one of the problems we have today in movies, right? You said that this was created in order for black teenagers, women to see themselves in these things. And maybe this is a spicy take, I don't think that should be the reason you create a show or a movie. You can add that into the movie. I think that's fine. I think it could be like, oh, well, let's cast this in order to be representative. I think that's fine. But if the whole reason you are making a show is to preach, right, that kind of like any kind of message, rather than the reason being, I'm trying to make a good movie, I'm trying to tell a good story, I'm trying to put on a good show. If that's not your guiding light and it's something else, like, well, I want to make a bunch of money, or I want to appeal to a bunch of young boys, and so I want to do all the slop that's been done, or I want to be diverse, or I want to score lefty points, or I want to make fun of righties, then I think you've kind of lost the plot, right? I think that's
Mhm.
happening, in my opinion, more than it should. And that is one of, not the only, but in my opinion, one of the reasons we are having slop today when it comes to movies. That's what I think.
Yeah, I'd also say on Bridgerton, especially like so. I think it's really interesting that they cast a black queen, and they had I can't remember what his like place in life was, but he was definitely in the elite, the main actor. And they had a backstory as to why they were there. So it wasn't like what they call colorblind casting. You weren't supposed to think about. You were supposed to actually recognize they were there and they are from another place, or they have heritage from another place. The problem with that was for me was that they also that's kind of a whitewashing in some ways as well. The British Empire at that time was hugely racist, had
Mhm.
slaves, was a cruel and horrible establishment. Actually, it looked pretty, but after that, it was pretty bad. And I think
Mhm.
to kind of like pretend, even like in this kind of cultural zeitgeist, oh, there was actually a black queen. And then I saw these like newspaper reports being like, oh, there actually could have been. Here's a portrait of a lady who was married into the royal family. Doesn't she kind of look a bit black? Isn't she got black? Hasn't she got black features? She was not black. She was from the Netherlands. She may have looked, but they were really trying to find the historical accuracy to how this may have actually
Mhm.
happened. And I think that is an unfortunate way of almost like delegitimizing the horrible establishment that was the British Empire at that time. And
Mhm.
there's a difference between that and casting back in the day when they used to cast a black American president, and that used to be like, whoa,
Mhm.
like why do you put like
Mhm.
Morgan Freeman as the president? Whoa. And
Mhm.
now, of course, it's different. But that
No
was
one
different
complained
because
about
that was
that
talking
though.
about
Yeah.
contemporary.
Mhm.
No one really complained about
Yeah,
that.
that no, exactly, because that was contemporary, because that was a
Mhm.
possibility, and that because that was like a hopeful idea of a
Mhm.
future coming towards us, not the past. And I think when you misrepresent the past, and even when you have good intentions about it, you can almost erase the horrible. I would have preferred if Bridgerton had some type of slavery narrative, some type of someone found out that their uncle had like a sugar mine in Jamaica or something, and that brought in some narratives and some characters because that would be accurate. I think
Mhm.
painting the British Empire as this kind of happy-go-lucky ethnically inclusive place at one time maybe is a danger. And I think the way we understand history from our movies, Chernobyl being another TV series that also did that, we have to understand people are getting their history from
Mm-hmm.
these TV shows and
Wait,
movies.
who's getting their history? Look, I was with you until then. I don't think anyone's turning to Bridgerton to find out about the British Empire. I just don't see
Well, as I
that.
said, they really tried to find the queen that they thought that was being
Mm-hmm.
represented, and they did. There were these articles about this one lady
Mm-hmm.
who married in. And with Chernobyl, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people have had their entire history of Chernobyl from that TV show, which
Mm-hmm.
has inaccuracies, but people just think about the TV show. So it's all about how we understand history. Schindler's List, all these TV shows and movies bring the history to our brains, not the books.
So I think I have a couple of responses. So I would agree with you, and I also think that like probably like I also prefer like historically accurate accounts of like of people of diverse backgrounds, people of color, black people, of Asian people. I would prefer that as like example. So I would prefer obviously like that would be a preferable example, and that would be probably a better movie. But a couple of things. To Wick. My first response to that is not everything has to be a good movie. Sometimes it's okay to produce things that are bad, that are just entertaining. And it's okay,
Um,
viewers, listen to me. It's okay for you to watch film and to watch media and to consume media that maybe doesn't have the best storyline. The characters are flat, but you like it just because it's something you can turn your brain off at the end of the day, and that is comfort food and that makes you feel good about who you are. That's an acceptable. Not every single piece of media that you consume or that you produce for that matter has to be, a high quality story in order for it to be a meaningful experience. Like I will freely admit to all of you, okay, look, I study literature. It's like my job to do it, like at the university. I watch a lot of trash TV, okay, shamelessly, and I know it's garbage, okay. I love the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. I love it, and I know in my soul that it's disgusting when I sit to watch it, okay. And I think that like the same thing is true for some of these representations, okay? They don't have to be good stories or the best, like they don't have to be the sort of thing that like they don't have to be the sorts of examples that are going to go on to win Academy Awards in order to justify their existence. They just have to be a form of film or a form of media that people are willing to watch and that brings some positive attribute into their lives. So that would be my first response to what you said, Wick. And I am sympathetic to what you said, Maeve, and I would agree with you. But and as much as I agree with you, and as much as I would agree that that would be a preferable thing to do, I tend to agree with Wick. I would agree with you. There probably are some people that maybe for the queen or for that character specifically, they might go down a rabbit hole to try to justify maybe she really was black. That might be true. But I think that for the majority of people, when they sit down and they watch the ballroom scene of a highly multi-ethnic and diverse group of people dressed in Regency era nobility garments, talking about who shall be the season's diamond, I think everyone is clued in on the fact, right, that Regency era Britain did not look like this, okay? Did not function like this. I think most people do know that, including like the young women like who will grow up to watch that piece of media, right? But I think the purpose of it is not to give an accurate version of history because none of this is accurate. It's not actually what happened. The purpose is to allow for women who otherwise might not have felt included, like to give them permission to wear a corset and bodice, to give them permission to feel like I too could be like Elizabeth Bennet. I too could be like Jane Eyre. I too could be like these characters. I can wear my fan and I can feel pretty and dainty and delicate and flirt with the handsome Mr. Darcy lookalike, right? I don't think the purpose of it is to transmit history. The purpose of it is to give permission to dream. And I think for a lot of young girls that grew up, like at least for me, I know that at least for me when I was growing up, my favorite movies growing up that presented, like femininity and, it was Mr. Darcy, it was Jane Eyre, it was these old Victorian 19th century British romantic films, right? And that's a genre that because it is historically accurate because it is so rooted in that reality is inaccessible to a wide variety of people, to a lot of black women, to a lot of Hispanic women. And I think that even though it's not accurate. And even if the narratives aren't necessarily, the stuff of an Oscar winning award show, I think that if they provide people comfort, if they improve the materially improve the lives of people, if they give people, like, if for no other reason, right? The balls are great. They are real balls. You should go to them. They are real
The
events.
best
You can
balls. The
no, no,
greatest
Yeah.
no.
balls.
I'm not joking. Okay, these are huge parties. Okay,
Huge balls. The balls are just
no,
gigantic.
it's a thing. You can buy like a ticket like for the VIP table. You go, you dress up in a ball gown, you buy a fan, you pose underneath this fake wisteria. You get a glass of champagne. The queen, who is really an actress, comes in and selects one of the girls. I mean, that is an experience. If for no other reason that people can go and can imagine themselves and can play pretend, I think that it's a fun thing to do. I think it's okay to allow a little frippery in our
Couple
lives.
things. $5 from the Turtle Emergency. And I'm learning about Bridgerton. Okay, gang, I'll be real. I've seen like half an episode. It just wasn't. I'm not the target audience. Let's say that. $5 from Turtle Emergency. Is Bridgerton not an alternate history with African and Indian nobility being brought into London society? Explicitly part of the plot in season 2? Maybe.
No, I don't think so. I think that Bridgerton, so there's a difference between something that is a lie and something that is a fiction. Okay. These two things are not the same thing. Okay. A lie is when you actually say, right, that yes, a Regency era ballroom would actually have had this diverse array of characters or this diverse array of people. Like that's a lie, right? That's not what Bridgerton is. Bridgerton is a fiction. It is a dream. It is a fantasy for young women to look at and to allow themselves basically to involve themselves in a form of imaginative play. That's what Bridgerton is. And and with that being said, yeah, I do think that there is still a legitimate criticism that you could make of Bridgerton, which is that I've never heard anybody talk about this. So it is a place where we can imagine, right, that maybe people of different ethnic groups can wear the Regency ball gown. You too could be the Lady of Yorktown, right? You too could be the Queen, the Season Steinman, right? But you're still basically, as a woman, viewed as a piece of meat in the show, right?
I'm listening. Tell me more.
Well, like we can imagine, like it just sort of is interesting, isn't it? That like we can imagine, like that the focus and push is that we can imagine a place where where maybe
where women are pieces of meat. Hell yeah, tell me more.
No, like where racism or allusions to maybe not eliminating racism, but like trying to portray a more diverse array of characters in terms of race is available in Bridgerton. But we can't imagine a Regency era feminist era, okay? We can't imagine an era like where we are completely divorced from the realities that like from women being oppressed on the basis of being female. That's not something that's a part of the imagination, right? And you can see this as an example. Yeah.
Go ahead, Maeve.
Yeah, it just kind of plays into this idea that like what is cool or what is good in movies and I guess life is wealth, power, and whiteness. So it's just like the closer you get to these things. So for example, and also being a man. So for example, if they made a movie and it was based on like an all-male real squad in World War II who did something really good, and instead of having the men, they had a female squad and they did it like, oh, look at these women and they saved the day in like Norway and they found the bomb or whatever. And it's like, yeah, but like they didn't do that. But what women did do is they were great nurses. They risked their lives and they did help people. Why are you saying that it's only a good movie when we're closer to these things? So like women are now going to be super soldiers. It's like, okay, cool. There are some women who are super soldiers, but hey, there are lots more women who, let's be real, historically have taken on the roles of nursing in war. And that is no small feat. That is no small feat. But the way that they frame movies is like, no, we're going to put you in a place where you're closer to power. So white people in Britain, they had power. But forget about your Indian societies with your Indian kings and queens. They were nothing. They were nothing. It's all about being close to the British power. Well, you know what? That doesn't matter. Like, they had every society had a royal family, like basically nearly every society. Why don't we do something based in like Nigerian, like old historical typical Nigerian, like upper class or whatever, close to that. But the closer you get to whiteness, power, and being a man, that seems to be cool in movies. So it's just, that's why I feel there's a problem here when we're putting in people in these roles that, like, we know they were white men or white people with power who had these. Like, you don't need to make me feel better. Like, I'm Irish. I don't want to be closer to the British crown, but I would like to see like an Irish women in 1916. We were really like running around being nurses. There was one Irish woman soldier leader, like, you know, Countess Markovic. Make a movie about her, but don't put me into a role that I know was obviously a guy.
Yeah.
Like, it's not going to make me feel better to be closer to the guy's role.
Why do
Like,
you think
Yeah.
they keep doing
nowadays it's a
that
bit
though? Because
different, but like
they've
historically,
but could we all agree that that's kind of what a lot of movies at least seem to aim for is not, they don't want to tell a good story, or they might want to, but they prioritize, at least in my opinion, um and I hate to say it like this, but SJW stuff. They do. It's hard to get away from it. Now, you could
what do
just
you mean? Can you
sure,
define
sure,
that
sure,
a
sure.
little bit to
So
me?
what
Because
I
I'm a bit
mean by
new.
that is much like what you said. They want, instead of exploring, like Bridgerton's a great example. Instead of going to the Indian courts or having a show about the African courts and how they led there and how they interacted there, and creating an interesting
Mhm.
piece on how courtship occurred in that location. You could make great stories based on
Hmm.
that. Great
Yeah, you
stories.
could.
Great. Instead of doing
Yeah.
that, they're like, no, let's just put let's just what's the South Park quote? Make them a girl and make them gay, right? Like that's pretty much what they do, right? And so it feels lazy. It feels
It's
tokenish.
tokenism.
It
Yeah.
feels it feels like it's taken the place of actual good writing. That's just how I feel. Now, there are exceptions to this. There's plenty of movies out that I've enjoyed. Everything Everywhere All at Once was amazing. I liked Longlegs. Longlegs was recently released. I really enjoyed that.
I haven't seen it
There's
yet.
been a
Yeah.
bunch of movies released that I enjoy. But overall, I think that the thing we came in here originally on is that movies are just worse today is just clear. It's just true. Go ahead, Fairy Queen. You're trying to get in.
Yeah, so a couple of things. So one of the reasons I think like why, which is a critique you could make like about SJW movies that do push for diversity, is that it rings hollow, right? It's that it doesn't really seem to be a sincere gesture towards that at all. So a classic example would be the Snow White movie. So when the Snow White movie originally was announced, the Snow White movie was touted as being highly diverse because the woman that was supposed to be portraying Snow White was Latina. And this was supposedly so, oh, look how progressive the film is. And then Peter Dinklage, okay, for those of you who don't know, the actor who played Tyrion Lannister in Game of Thrones, he's an actor, if you haven't seen Game of Thrones, he's an actor that has dwarfism. So he said, this is Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, okay? The dwarves are being portrayed in this highly insensitive way, but it's extremely progressive because Snow White happens to be a Hispanic woman. That's not progressive at all, right? And so you'll see that, and that's what I'm saying about Bridgerton. I think it's a similar problem, right? Which is that there is an appeal to diversity, but the appeal really seems to be kind of shallow, and it doesn't really seem to really think through the concept, not just like the fact that it's historically inaccurate, but it seems to be like a shining label that's slapped on the tin to get you to purchase it and get you to buy it, right? Without truly absorbing like the truly progressive values about actually creating a true progressive piece of art, which is one thing that you could say.
Yeah.
And I
But
think
I
that's part of the
also
reason why.
I know the answer why this is the way. Like, I know why they're putting in what you call like gay female characters into movies. Like inserting characters into what I would deem boy movies, but like you can take them as you will. Like Marvel, like sci-fi war movies. I love some war movies, but I do deem them boy movies. The reason why they're doing
Well,
that
hold on.
is because
Wait.
society
Hold
in
on. Hold on. No, no,
general,
no. We're not gonna let you just slide by on. Oh, these are boy movies,
I like
right?
them, but
What's
they
a
are
what's a
boy
boy
movies.
movie exactly?
You know what a boy movie is.
Do
Boy
I?
movie has lots of bang, bang,
You do.
bang, 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 drugs, bang, 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 more drugs,
Where?
drugs and bang, bang. Like
Okay.
it's all like
That's
it's
an
like war
action
movie
movie,
combat.
sure. But is it
A
a
lot of
boy
action,
movie?
yeah.
Like, why are we saying? See, so here's
Okay,
my
well,
issue with your framing.
demographically, who loves those movies more? Let's be real. Let's be real. Go to the movies. Go to the cinema on opening night of like any Die Hard, any James Bond,
I
any
think
action, any.
Yeah.
one of the reasons that's
Let's be
true isn't because women don't like those movies just naturally. It's because society has kind of said, as you did, those are boy movies. Girls don't go see those kinds of movies. And I remember
I
growing
don't have
up,
a problem with it. It's cool.
because I grew up
But what
with
I was going to
sisters.
say is to
I grew up with
yeah, and they like
sisters,
them.
right? And that's what my
Yeah.
parents said. And I love my parents, but
Mhm.
my mom would be like,
But
movie night. Oh, Dad and Whick. I won't use my name, right? Dad and Whick. They're gonna go see the boy movie. She didn't say that, but the action movie, right? The Highlander or whatever.
mm,
And
yeah,
we're gonna go see, I don't Notebook. I don't even
Bridget
know, right?
Jones's
Like,
Diary
yeah,
or
something like that,
yeah.
right? So I don't know if I just don't like
Well, I'm
this
sorry I
idea.
offended you.
It's
I was
okay.
a
You
bit
can offend
too
me again. Everyone offends me. It's fine. But it
okay.
feels
PC
weird to
PC
say
police
these are boy
here.
movies and these are girl
Well,
movies.
Okay,
if, if,
but the reason I was going to say that, let me finish my point really quickly. If you go onto the IMDb list, best movies of all time, you will see it takes you about 25 movies to get into a movie that has a female protagonist that is kind of around a female story. So instead of like Avengers, Godfather,
Aliens.
Scarface, well, I mean, that's not okay, fine. I guess Alien is a very like normal, typical female story. I like Alien, but I'm just saying
yeah.
what I'm trying to get at here is male orientated fantasy heroism movies, which I like. My favorite movies are like Blood Diamond Troy, Gladiator, Fury. I love those movies. They are male dominated, male fantasy, male heroism movies. I have no problem with that. But the reason is they've been seen as better movies by society at large.
Kill
So therefore,
Bill.
if you want to
Max
make
Fury
money and
Road.
you want to be a
Mad Max Fury Road. I'm
yeah,
just thinking
there's
off the top
always
of my head. There's a
exceptions.
bunch of
The fact that
movies
you
that
can
have
name an exception and not be like, but there's so many. I just have so many to choose from. You're like, I know Kill Bill. Kill Bill. Wait, Kill Bill. That means there
Well,
aren't that many.
hang on. Pause. Because hang on. Wick. Okay, let's talk about some of these examples that you've given. Okay, like specifically Kill Bill. Okay, like I know why you would say, and maybe it's true that there are lots of women for whom that like movie really appeals to, but I know for me personally, and like the women that I know in my life, like just personally, Kill Bill is not the movie that they like. You want to know the movie that they really like? There was a movie that came out. What was it called? It was a movie about a woman who would pretend to be drunk at a bar, and then she would bring these guys home, and then she would not be drunk anymore as they were just about to rape her, and she did
I've
this
heard of this
specifically to
movie.
expose them as being
Yeah, I
bad
heard of
people.
this movie. I didn't see it
What,
Oh,
though.
hard
what is
candy.
this?
Is it
What
hard
is this?
candy?
That's
Is
what
it
it's
hard
called.
candy?
No, Hard Candy is about
Do
the
you?
the kid who
Hmm.
proposed as a
Yeah.
kid. But the
Hmm.
what she's talking about is a different. But Hard
Oh,
Candy was good.
Yeah.
I
So
enjoyed Hard Candy. I haven't
yeah.
seen. I know what you're talking about, but I haven't seen that one.
What is it? Young Promising Woman. I think that's what it's
Yeah,
called.
yeah.
That's what it's called.
oh
Yeah, it
yeah.
recently came
Promising Young
out.
Woman. Yeah.
So here's the problem with like the badass, the kung fu princess, let's say. Okay, the problem of like the really badass, the woman in Kill Bill. Okay, most women when they go into the theater and they sit down, and this is true even of me. And hey, I grew up in a military family. I grew up watching a lot of like war films and a lot of love superhero movies. Okay, but I know in my soul, okay, when I see Wonder Woman on the screen, when I see like the woman in Mad Max, I know that's not me, okay? Her life, the what is it? The woman Megan Fox in like the crop top when she's like popping the hood of like the Terminator car and she's like doing that. That's not my life. That's not my experience. That's what men think that's what men think female representation in film is supposed to be. Female representation of like what female empowerment it looks like is different than what men say it is. And it's different because the kung fu badass woman who can slide, like I've seen this so many times, right? It's the Natalie Portman syndrome, right? It's the woman who is incredibly hot. Oh, but she's a rocket scientist, right? And she's badass. Yeah, but she's also,
Yeah, but
118
that's
pounds
with
and is kung
men
fu in the
movies
first.
too. Do you think I could go around slicing up? No, I'm a
Yeah,
40-year-old man.
Yeah, but the difference is
No,
the difference.
no,
But
most guys
the
can't do all that shit.
yeah,
And
but
most guy protagonists are Mary Sue-ish too, where they're getting 20 women, right?
yeah,
And the James
but
Bond where he can go out and he knows like 10 languages and he can play poker just super great and stuff. Like no one watching that movie, like they know they can't be that, right? They're just not.
but what I'm saying is that like unlike, and this is a difference, this is a disagreement we have, Wick. I think that these representations of women within these films, even though they're promoted as being really empowering, because they are so divorced from like the real struggles that a lot of women go through in the world, which is what Young Promising Woman does. That whole film, it's about rape, it's about sexual assault, it's about men pretending to be really, really nice when they're actually
Shows
not.
Alien, yeah.
And yeah, but Alien is probably the exception to this, right? But Mad Max, The Terminator, right? Kill Bill, this is like a man's opinion about like what female and an empowered female character
Wait,
should look
Mad
like
Max
on screen in
Fury
action.
Road is a male opinion of what female empowerment is? Have you seen that movie?
Okay, if we're thinking of the same movie. Okay,
Mad
I'm
Max
thinking
Fury
of
Road, where a Furiosa
what year?
rescues women who had been trapped by the fucking Immortan Joe and raped, to
Yeah,
be clear, and she's rescuing them, and they're all pregnant, right? And she's trying to get them to safety.
But here's the deal, right? Like when I remember sitting down, and if we're thinking about the same film, I remember sitting down and watching that film, and I watched her go in there, and I thought to myself, I'm probably more likely to be the woman that's hooked up and is being forced to be pregnant and is like being made to do the weird breast milk thing. That's probably more likely going to be my life. I am not this woman. This is not who I am, right? This is, right? I understand that like we can't all impose who we are personally on the characters that come onto the
Seen
screen,
Kill Bill?
but like I have heard of Kill Bill and I've seen the
so
trailer.
here's the problem with your analysis. Kill Bill, at least the opening scene, as I remember, right, isn't her being slicey dicey. Well, she does eventually, but she's a housewife. She's just taking care of her kids, and then her past catches up to her, right, and then she has to go all slicey dicey. But again,
she goes all slicey dicey.
Yeah, slicey. But again, this is like
look, dude.
Obviously, I'm not going to be the Mad Max either. Look, I'm almost certainly, none of us are certainly going to be the hero of the story. But it's nice to pretend from time to time.
I think the problem is the wish fulfillment in itself. That's what I'm kind of getting at. Isn't our wish fulfillment? So, like, look, I have no problem. As I said again, I love the movie Fury. I think that is the most underrated movie. I think that's the best movie of our decade or our century, quite frankly. I think it's perfect. I think there's nothing wrong with it. But I will say the wish fulfillment of men is I can be Brad Pitt or Shia LaBeouf. I'd be in that tank. I'd be like, bang, bang, go Nazis. But I'm like, I appreciate this movie. I love the storyline of the characters. But this is not my wish fulfillment. I don't watch this being like, oh yeah, I could do that. Oh, I can. Oh yeah, I'm Brad Pitt right now. I'm there in the tank. I can see myself going like that's not what I think. But when I watch a movie like Prozac Nation, which is one of my favorites, or even like Girl Interrupted, these are not wish fulfillment, but what they are is like some type of like, oh yeah, I could be Angelina Jolie. I could go so fucking crazy. Like I could be this crazy, outspoken, like femme fatale, but also angry lady. But I could also be Amelie, like in Paris, walking around solving everybody's problems. I could be the sweet Audrey Hepburn. I could be beautiful. And we have those movies, but men don't watch them. And the movie industry knows that. If you ask a guy like, what's the last movie you saw about a female protagonist who was just running around doing her own female world? Like that's so okay. That is sexist. I can't believe I said that. A female protagonist who doesn't have a gun. Okay, she doesn't have a gun or a sword or she's fighting. Just a female protagonist who's just not fighting. Not using violence, just take the violence aspect out. She's just being in the world. Yeah. And that men are like, but that's boring and I don't like that. And it's like, why not? But that's when they are like, well, I don't know what women want. And it's like, well, you never watch our movies. But it's just the fact is like we're not as important or we're not as cool in those storylines.
The deal, and I'll let you go in a second, Fairy Queen. But those movies do poorly because women also don't watch those movies.
Amelie is a high-grossing movie. We love Amelie. Girl Interrupted is one of the highest grossing movies too.
But
women watch that. Women in general watch that film. No
exceptions.
Girl Interrupted is like a very popular film amongst women. Most women, if you ask them, if you don't believe me, okay, go and ask most of the women who you know in your life and ask them if they've seen Girl Interrupted. I guarantee you they will
Why
have. Like
don't they
that's a
make
very
as
What I
much
popular.
find
money?
really
Because
disconcerting is
here's
that
what I'm hearing.
One
Here's
Flew Over
what,
the Cuckoo's
if
Nest
I
is
may.
more watched by men, and it's the same movie but with men.
Here's
Yep,
what I'm hearing though,
true.
right? From one side of y'all's mouth, right? You're saying, well, you know, the best movies, the highest grossing movies are the ones with action and that are men movies, boy movies as you call them. And then the ones that do poorly are the women's movies. But then when I interrogate you like, well, okay, yeah, because women don't also do not go see those movies. It's well like no, women love it. And I'm sure the women who saw it loved it. I guarantee you that's probably true, right? But that doesn't change the point is these movies don't perform as well as quote unquote men movies is because not as many people watch them. Just straight up.
So
Why?
So I
Why?
would so first of all, that's not entirely true. So one of the examples I think we'll talk about tonight is Barbie. Okay, Barbie is a film that was very much like created and directed for women. It was about women, and it was one of I think it was
Ken
the
was the star
highest
of the
grossing.
show.
And that was the highest grossing film of the year, I think. I could be wrong, but I think it was. And it was like, it made like over $1 billion. Am I wrong for thinking it made over $1 billion worth of revenue? It was
I'm not sure.
extremely, exceedingly, I think it did. So if I'm wrong, somebody can check me on, but I think that that's true. I'm going off of memory here. So it's not true that like women don't want to go and to see like films. That's a very modern and recent example of a film that was very much about women's issues that like succeeded very, very well.
Hold on. Barbie's a bad
just
example. Barbie's a bad example because it appealed to both men and women. Men saw themselves in Ken, women saw themselves in Barbie, and there was a fusion.
No, that's not true.
Do you
Okay,
think men didn't? I like that movie because Ken
a
was
lot
the
of men
star of the
hated
show. Ken was
that
great.
film. It was so hated by so many men that it was banned in some countries, okay? It's explicitly banned because of its feminist messaging. Like it was a matter of law whether or not you could go and you could see that film. There were various countries where it was not even allowed to be screened because of it. So, and that's because of its representations of women within the film, okay? There were a lot of articles, and you can even find probably people like in your chat or people like out in public where you'll ask them about Barbie, but what will they say about Barbie? They'll say, oh, it's just a kid's movie. Oh, well, it's plastic feminism. Oh, it's feminism that's just there. It's just a feminist movie
some
that just
chat
exists.
quotes to you. I liked Barbie and have a penis. I'm just Ken, right? The men that hated that movie in those countries didn't watch it. They don't count. I'm Knuff.
They can't because it's banned. It's illegal. That's why
But
they
that
couldn't
doesn't
watch
have
it.
anything to do, right? The fact that it was censored because it had feminist messaging doesn't have because by like crazy countries doesn't have anything to do with the overall point that men and women both who saw that movie enjoyed that movie, maybe for different reasons, right? But that movie was made specifically tailored to both men and women, but in different ways.
No, I think like if you look at the message, that film was specifically. Here's an example.
Ken had a whole musical montage with Ken and the boys.
Wait. Hang on. So I'll explain. Okay. So think about like when you went to go see the film in theaters. Okay. Ben Shapiro even pointed this out. What were the other films that were being marketed at the very beginning of the film? They weren't films that were directed towards boys. They were films, or maybe not like towards like they weren't action films. Okay. They weren't superhero movies. They were films like Troll. They were films that were really directed towards young children. The people that went to go see that movie were moms with their little kids. Moms brought their little girls over with them to go see that movie in droves. And that's who that film was marketed towards. It was marketed really towards mothers because they know that, like, it's just true. Like, the person that's going to buy the doll, right, it's going to be a mom with daughters. And that's actually one of the reasons why a major part of the film, it's about the mom playing with the Barbie doll and having to have this moment with her daughter. It's about older women speaking to younger women. And also, like, this is just another point in stat, and I don't think anyone will disagree with me here. The person who makes most of the consumer decisions, like within the household, are typically women. Okay, that means that if anybody's going to be buying a ticket to bring their little kids to go see the movies, it's probably going to be mom. Okay,
so the highest grossing films are action films, which you say women don't like as much, and yet women have purchasing power and make purchasing decisions in the home.
But why
and yet
do
they're
they
the
do
ones
that?
that are getting grossing the more movies.
No,
and let's talk about. Well, I'm not done. Let's talk about your interpretation of Barbie. You are probably correct when it comes to the marketing team and how they wanted to market it to people. Fair enough, because when I went in, I saw it, right? I was expecting something entirely different than what I got. But when I got there and when I saw it and what blew up on social media and what blew up amongst the meme makers of the world, right, is that they had a very powerful male co-lead who had a story that appealed to young men as well as young women and men of all ages and women of all ages. And it was a show that kind of bridged the gap in a very real way. That's one of the reasons it succeeded as it did, is because men and women both liked it. They both enjoyed their experience there. Am I wrong? How am I wrong?
Opinion was split. So that's my first answer. Part of the reason why Barbie, I think, was really successful is because it was controversial. Okay, you had Michael Knowles would agree with you. Ben Shapiro would not. Okay,
Good. Ben Shapiro's dumb.
Okay, but the point is, right, that different people and different men had, there's huge division amongst men as to whether or not they liked Barbie or disliked
That's
it. Okay?
every single movie. You have people who like it and people who don't.
This movie was more controversial than like a variety of films that have come over, and specifically because it's a feminist film. And not only just that it's a feminist film, but that it's an old-fashioned feminist film. It's an old-fashioned feminist film that's about a doll that really appealed to women who were much, much older. I didn't really play with Barbie dolls, for instance. People of my mom's and older generation, they played with Barbie dolls. When they think of Barbie, we think of like older women from the boomer generation who transitioned from playing with baby dolls to playing with a Barbie doll, which meant that you could imagine yourself as a doctor, as a lawyer, as a Supreme Court justice, as the president of the United States. That's the significance of the Barbie doll. It is a gift that is passed down. It's a dream that's passed down from your mom, from your grandma to you. And that's why it's being given to you. And that's why the film was marketed. It's why it was written the way that it was, et cetera, et cetera. I think this is interesting. There is something else that I want to talk to you tonight. And that's about another reason why I think people aren't responding to films maybe as much. And that has to do with meta-modernism, which I'd like to get into. I don't know if we have time to, but I'll pause there to see if anybody else had anything else to say about Barbie.
Well, I want to hear May's opinion. Do you think that men hated Barbie?
I think some didn't like it. Now, I obviously was kind of quiet there because I did see Barbie only recently for the first time. I was on a plane, and it was one of those things like, where you like, I'm gonna go see it, I'm gonna go see it. Oh, I forgot to go see it, never went to see it. It wasn't like I didn't want to see it. It just happened that I forgot to see it. And then I saw it on the plane, didn't get the full like cinema experience. I think for me, the problem with Barbie, like my boyfriend liked Barbie more than I did. Actually, he really liked Barbie.
Because a lot of men did. Because the best character in that was the man. That was the best storyline. Ken was the best storyline in the movie. Anyway, carry on.
He was. I think I had problems with Barbie only like based in some aspects. Maybe like I rejected some kind of the monologue. I rejected the feeling. I felt it was a little bit like what you saying. It was a different era of women. I think it was speaking to. I don't think it was speaking to my era. I didn't grow up with Barbie. I didn't grow up thinking I had to be stick thin and be perfect and be sweet and be nice as much as maybe previous generations. I appreciated that it spoke to them, like Gen X. But I felt like, and I could be privileged, right? Because I was like an only child and I was kind of, I guess, treated a bit spoiled. And I could have had a bit more freedom to be like not the oldest sister of 3 brothers or something, or 3 sisters. I wasn't. So anyway, there was reasons why I personally didn't resonate. But yeah, I mean, that was my thing. Like my boyfriend, he liked it. He liked it a lot. But I do think that there were some men who absolutely did not like that movie. I mean, that's obviously a kid thing like that. You can't say.
It's true with every movie, though. I don't think that's a.
It's true with every movie. But I think maybe
finish.
There could be more of a visceral.
Kind of...
Yeah, like you could not like Oppenheimer, but nobody was screaming about not liking Oppenheimer. No one was like, "Oh my god, the worst movie I've ever seen."
I seriously turned it off because it was so boring. I was watching it on my like home. I didn't.
Wait, how many countries banned Oppenheimer legally? Like, how many countries banned Oppenheimer? Did Japan ban Oppenheimer? Did Korea? Like think of like the countries that do not like us. Did any of them ban like for the same reasons? Did they ban like if
Why
you looked
do you think they banned Barbie?
Because of its feminist messaging about like women being empowered.
Because it showed a map of the South China Sea that was politically inconvenient for a lot of the countries that banned it.
That's not the only reason. It's also because of the messaging within the film. I know what you're talking about. Yes, it's true for that specific country. It's also true, however, because of the messaging within the film itself. That's the other reason why it was banned. Like that is true for like some countries.
But
It's
yeah,
very reasonable.
Oppenheimer was just boring. Okay, I would rather
Was it banned?
controversy.
I don't
It
care if it's
doesn't
boring. Was
matter.
it
What
banned?
does that have
It
to do with
does.
how?
It does. It
Why?
absolutely does. It absolutely does.
Why?
Because why? I'm about to tell you why, okay? Because that whole movie, it is about the literal bombing, annihilation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. If that, are you gonna, okay, this is chat. You can look it up for yourselves. Okay, was Oppenheimer banned in Japan? Could you be a Japanese person and go to see that film? Because that film, and if so, I want you to ask yourselves, why could you be a Japanese person? Why could you go and see Oppenheimer legally, like within your country?
Did they
But you
ban
can't. And some
Barbie
of
from
these, but
Japan?
you, but no, that's not what I'm saying. But why is it that in some countries that like are extremely sexist and misogynistic towards women, why is it that Barbie was banned there? Why is it that it's not being treated the same way? Because if you're saying it's just the same, well, all movies are like that, okay? Oppenheimer is a very clear example. It should be your canary in the coal mine, okay? Why did that not happen with Oppenheimer? If it didn't, and maybe I'm wrong, somebody can prove me wrong right now.
Well, here's the thing. It was delayed in Japan by 8 months, so they didn't show it right
Was
away.
was it banned? Was it banned?
It was
Not was
delayed.
it
Well,
was
probably
it
why they
banned?
no. But
So
again,
that's a no. It was not banned in Japan. It was people were allowed to watch it in Japan, unlike other countries which banned Barbie because of its feminist messaging. Okay,
what
and
does
they
this
had
have to do
it
with
has to do with the
who?
systemic. I'm explaining why. Okay, it has to do right with the fact that people were more okay with watching a film that was about millions of Japanese people being killed because of the nuclear bomb. The country in which that happened delayed the film but did not ban it. Other countries that like have systemic discrimination against women outright ban that film and you couldn't see it. That says something. It says something on a level of magnitude. It says something about the ways in which women are portrayed in media and the ways that men, and not only just men, but the ways that our culture is structured to respond to representations of women and what representations of women are allowed and are not allowed to the point that they're actually outlawed and
But
banned.
what it
That's
doesn't say, what it doesn't speak to, is how Western audiences have responded to media, to movies in the past few years, especially to women's movies versus boys movies, as you guys called it, and girls movies or chick flicks, as they might respond to it, right? Like, here's the deal, right? I think that you have a point when it comes to Muslim and backwards countries. Fair enough. But I'm talking about America. I'm talking about Canada. I'm talking about Western audiences and how they have engaged with media and movies and cinema in the past 10, maybe 20 years. And my point here is that representation doesn't seem to be the seller that it's being pointed out to be. What does seem to be seller, what people like, are things with a good plot, good characters, good writing, and yes, it turns out that most people, men and women, like a little action in their movies. That's just how
Yeah.
it's coming across.
I think I was just like thinking as you were saying that, I just like had like a flashback of Blade Runner in my mind because I was thinking of like a modern, interesting movie that obviously it was made in the 80s and then the sequel was made more lately.
Yeah.
And I recently watched both movies for the first time, like ever, like last month. I've never seen them before. And I saw the Harrison Ford movie and then straight away the Ryan Gosling movie. And what I kept thinking was, this is a really interesting dystopian premise. I know everyone here is just like, oh my God, she only saw Blade Runner. Like, this is the only movie
We
she ever
won't
seen that's
judge you too
dystopian. Like, there's
harshly.
so many
Carry
better
on, yeah.
ones. Like, I know there are better, yeah, I was
No,
going to say
Blade
there are
Runner's
better
top
dystopian
tier,
movies than Blade
to be
Runner.
clear.
Okay, good. Because I don't want to be like, it's like cliche. But what I realized, it was a really interesting premise, a really interesting dystopia, a really interesting idea. And in Blade Runner 1 and 2, you could not get past the kind of, and I'm not being like mean about this, but the male fulfillment hero fantasy. Now, I love it. As I said, it's cool, but it's really difficult to engage in a character. So you're trying to understand the life through this character's eyes. You're trying to be in the movie with him. You're trying to be like, what's it like to live in this dystopia and have this odd job where you have to like talk to AI and figure out if they're real or not. That's so crazy. And you're trying to figure that out, but he's got girl problems. He's got like a male kind of like idea of like loneliness and this kind of masculine like,
What's a
expectation that he
male
has to be
idea
always
of
on.
loneliness?
Well, I think I mean, that's a really like, I love that kind of trope in movies because I think it shows up really well. If you, when you notice it at first, you always notice it. It's like The Drive. So think of the movie Drive. When a man is feeling sad or lonely, he's alone drinking a whiskey, not talking to anybody. He's sitting there with his
Yeah.
whiskey. He's staring at like the
How does
sky
that
for,
contrast
he's
with a
just like
woman's
being.
idea of loneliness?
And by the way, this is not denigrating that. I'm actually like in the middle of writing about it. I think it's really interesting for guys to resonate with these characters. I think that's like the loneliness of sadness of men is something that is tragically very apparent in our society. And that shows up in the movies. They're reflecting back what men go through all the time. But when women are feeling lonely, they may have a different way of dealing with that. Or
Such
even
as
just, you
what?
can
Hold
tell,
on. No, I reject this notion
but they don't
that
sit
women
alone with a
loneliness is
whiskey.
different than men loneliness, as if we're different
It is different.
species. We're not. I think we all experience
I,
loneliness.
I agree with Maeve. I do think that it's different, and I'll tell you why I think it's different. I think that, like, for women, the reason why it's different is the version of female loneliness often doesn't look like you're alone with your whiskey and your cigarette and you're staring off into the smoky haze of New York City. It looks like you have 6 kids and your husband hasn't come home. You have your family is far away. You have no friends. You're trying to make it. You're scraping by each day. You have 6 kids, little kids that you need to take care of, and you have no idea what you're going to do. And you are all entirely alone. The vision of female loneliness, I think, often looks like being in a crowd of people and having no support around you, but being responsible for a ton of
So
people around you. So that's what it looks like.
when men are feel lonely, they're alone, and when women feel lonely, they got a lot of people around them. Cool, got it.
No. When women feel alone, women, that means that they are the sole responsible person in the room and they have a lot of dependents and they don't have a lot of help around them to help them with those dependents. Or it looks like they're in a family or in a group where they are at the lower end of the totem pole, let's say, okay, and they're being bullied and they're being ostracized, but they can't leave and there's no way for them to leave, okay? That's what it typically looks like. That's why Girl Interrupted is a really good
Well, have you
example of
ever
that.
seen things like
There's a,
fucking? Oh, go ahead, please. But no, real quick.
there's a movie
Um,
called yeah, go on.
that's just real quick. But there are shows where you've seen men, and I hesitate to name one off the top of my head because there might be extenuating circumstances like American Beauty, things like that, where the men also have the family, right? They also are surrounded by people, and yet they still feel alone. They still feel helpless. They still feel lost, right? That's a trope that exists both in men and women. What I'm rejecting and what I'm taking issue with here is this idea that men loneliness and female loneliness are fundamentally different. I don't think they are. And by and we keep doing this. We keep trying to genderify emotion. And I don't think you I think it's causing problems. I think it's driving a
We're,
wedge into things
we're not
where
genderfying
Well,
emotion, we're genderfying experience. Those two things are not the
and
same.
$5 from Fat
but you
Surprise
have to
say
look at males.
alternatively they have 12 cats. Thank you for $5. But go ahead,
You have to look
Mel.
at male suicide rates being higher than women. Like you have to look at these like differences in gender when it comes to pain and when it comes to depression and when it comes to loneliness. Like genderifying it does not negate one or the other. Like I know like men are killing themselves more than women are, but women are also like, you know, overdosing or having different ways of like violence in their loneliness when they get to that stage as well. But you know, there is like that's the gender differences in different like areas like abuse or domestic abuse, they do make a difference in how we experience them. So going back to movies, like when I'm looking at Blade Runner and and Drive, think of the movie Drive and Blade Runner together. It's the same movie. And you have the same male protagonist and he is lonely, but he's a good guy. He's trying his best, but he's got nothing in his flat and he's got no friend he can apparently talk to. He's sitting alone having a whiskey. There's a girl he's trying to rescue or save. He's being the white knight. He's doing everything he can to save her. He risks his life. He nearly dies. This is kind of this kind of glorification of the male kind of like as the protector, savior, and also never asking anyone for support.
What
Then you
is
look at like a movie like
Hold
well,
on. No,
that's
I
how a
want to
lot of guys
interrupt
feel.
this.
They feel I can't talk to my friends. Yeah.
Yeah, that's all well and good, but Blade Runner is a movie about the human experience, and Drive is a fundamentally different theme. There's fundamentally different themes to the movie of Drive. I'm not as familiar with Drive
Like the same
as I am with
movie.
Blade Runner, but Blade Runner is about exploring what it means to actually be a human being, to actually be alive. And one of the whole things is him going through and talking to the AI and finding out which ones are actual human and actual AI, and the difficulty he has with it, and the struggles he has, and the fact, well, I won't spoil it, but there's a lot of depth there. Drive is a good movie
Oh, yeah.
as it happens, but they're just fundamentally different themes in the movie. And yes, the protagonist has aesthetically similar things to them, but they're going through fundamentally different experiences and having different journeys. $5 from B-Man Scout to say I don't exactly disagree with Fairy Queen, but I think women's loneliness doesn't need to focus so much on children or romance to be serious. And thank you for the $5. But go ahead.
Me too. I guess like argue why like they're similar. And this trope is not just in these two movies. You'll see it over and over again. It's like in a movie where there's a male hero, but he's an underdog and he's alone and he's very much alone. Like there's no wife, no girlfriend, and he is sitting alone, being a protector hero of some woman who either doesn't know he exists, barely know he exists, or he's trying to save some kind of town or city or world, or and he's doing this without ever telling anyone. He never asks for help. Like think of Aragorn. I mean, he has like, in the distance he does have Arwen and that's great, but a lot of that movie he's really struggling and he's alone and he never asks help. He's never like, "Hey, I'm feeling bad, guys." Meanwhile, Legolas and his friend,
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember his name, are having a great time together and Aragorn's all like alone and stoic until the
Yeah.
end. And this whole idea of like
Oh,
machismo
wait.
of like you have to be, if you're going to be the
No, 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 no,
hero,
no. Oh,
you
God,
got to
you're
do it
getting this so
alone.
wrong. Aragorn lost his friend Boromir, right? The tragedy of Boromir, right? That whole arc that happened, right? Boromir was his buddy, his friend. They were comrades. They went on the adventure together. Boromir, like, no, you're getting it wrong. Carry on,
Barmir
please.
Barmir had to die for Aragorn to be alone. That's why Barney died, because every other male character in that movie has a mate, like Frodo and
No,
Sam, and
Boromir died
Legolas and
because
his friend.
it was telling a story about power and the temptation of using evil in order to do a good thing. That's where Boromir died in the movie. Not so Aragorn would be alone, but go on, please.
Really very invested. I feel like this is a whole debate, but like I feel like you were
Yeah.
very invested. But I mean, what I'm saying is, I mean, going back to like why we was talking about gender perspectives in movies and like watching a dystopian movie like Blade Runner, really enjoying it. And I do like the fact that they focused on a male character going through like his own issues. I do think we should maybe open up the idea of a more female protagonist in that position, whatever that position is. It's the position of whatever is the dystopian world, and it's not them being Mad Max Fury and going around with like guns and slinging. It's them living a life like the Blade Runner character, somehow in the mix of this world that's like crazy, but living their life in a way that we can understand it. Now, I feel like this is like going off into a different like topic than what we were originally talking about, but I do think it's interesting. And also, dystopian movies, are there enough like black characters? Where are the gay characters in dystopian movies? I know that sounds very SJW, but seriously, where are they?
I
Like,
I
is
don't
there any?
I don't know because that's not the point of the movie to find the gays. Okay, when I'm
I
watching
mean,
it, maybe
wouldn't
that's
that be
just
so
me, but I'm
interesting?
not
What is
watching
a
a dystopian
dystopian
movie and
character?
thinking where are the gay guys? I don't know. I
But wouldn't
don't
that be so
know.
interesting? Like, what happens in the dystopian universe where people have like retreated in maybe like values and gone back to traditional values? What happens to like, I don't know, minorities? Like, how do they focus? I mean, I don't know. That could be a movie, but like, there isn't a movie, I don't
Hmm.
think, unless
I
someone knows
don't
it.
know. Go ahead, Fairy Queen.
I want to propose a theory to you, Wick, which is that part of the reason I think why people are responding badly, like we're talking a lot about SJW topics, we're talking about diversity, which is fine, but I think there's another new change in movies right now of how a lot of movies are, maybe not most movies, but definitely film movies that are winning Academy Awards, movies that are like being rewarded. There is a trend that's happening now that wasn't true in the 90s. It wasn't well, it started in the 90s, that wasn't true like in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and it wasn't true in like the 1900s to the 1940s. And that has to do with a concept in like film and literature that's called meta-modernism or postmodernism. So just to give you a very brief understanding, okay, just for those of you who don't know, this is my lit brain turning on, okay? So from the 1900s to like roughly the 1940s, okay, most films had a narrative structure that looked like this, okay? They followed a modernist film structure, okay? And a modernist film typically has an objective view of reality. It has a lack of irony. It is sincere. It portrays specific values and it argues for those values as good and beneficial. It looks at traditional values and it says that they're flawed. And it says that basically a belief in science and rationalism can resolve this, okay? This is your typical John Wayne film, okay? These are all the films of the 40s, of the 30s. These are films that, like, there's a good guy, there's a bad guy, the narrative is straightforward, there are no twists. You know that the bad guy will be destroyed somehow in the end, you know, good triumphs over evil, et cetera, et cetera. That's our foundational understanding of like what a movie. And just to give you an example of like what a movie that looks like this, Top Gun Maverick is an example of a modernist film. That's a very new film that's happened right now, but it's an exception to the rule. It's an example of like this straightforward form of narrative structure that used to be very common in film. For those of you who don't know this, what I'm telling you right now, it comes from a wonderful YouTube video. It's by Thomas Flight. You can find it. It's called like What is Metamodernism or Why Are Movies Different? You can find it online. So please check it out if you want to like watch it in more depth, but I'm just giving you the cliff notes here. That was the original form of most films. Then it moved into the postmodern film era, okay? Postmodern films arose as questioning modernist values, as modernist values became the norm in broader culture, okay? So this is post-World War II, post-nuclear warfare, post the War of Vietnam, post the Civil Rights Act. All of these events caused the culture to challenge previously held beliefs that science, reason, etc. could be enough to fix things, okay? So instead of turning to traditional values, they often turn to question the use of narrative itself. So an example of this would be Pulp Fiction, okay? That is a very postmodern film, okay? Pulp Fiction, that is a film that like it embodies like what postmodern films are supposed to be, which is that we should be skeptical of any broad overarching narrative that thinks it should be able to explain the world, okay? Seinfeld is another example of a postmodern narrative, okay? These narratives, postmodern narratives,
Carry on.
well, postmodern narrative, yeah, these narratives are usually surreal. There's usually a lot of irony. They usually are self-reflexive. They refer to themselves. Genre conventions are usually deconstructed. The point of it is to laugh at the genre convention. Monty Python is an example of a postmodern film. But eventually, postmodernism gets bored. We get it, okay? Seinfeld, you know, nothing means anything, right? Nihilism reigns supreme, okay? You know, you can only subvert expectations so many times before a new expectation, the expectation becomes that expectation will be subverted. So an example of this would be M. Night Shyamalan, right? Everybody probably remembers here The Sixth Sense, right? There was a huge shock and twist at the end of the film, right? Where you find that the psychologist is dead the entire time. He's a ghost, right? And he's been... Oh yeah, like it's the huge twist, right?
Gee, okay, hold on. You might actually be spoiling these movies for Maeve because she hasn't watched any like films that are modern until like very recently. So you might actually be spoiling these things. But go on.
Well, I'm sorry, but you now know. So yeah, but the consequence of that was every single film that M. Night Shyamalan made after this, The Sixth Sense, everyone expected there to be a twist. They expected something to go wrong because of what a huge deal that original shocking twist was at the end of the film. So the expectation to going into a film from then on was, you know, it's going to be surreal. It's going to be ironic. It's going to be like, what is it? There's the Christmas movie, like where the ham explodes. What is it called? Does anybody know what it's called? Like it's the Great Humbert. No, it's the Great Humbert Christmas. It's when he has the 8,000 lights on top of the house, right? It's very surreal and ironic. Like that was most film up until roughly the 90s and really 2000s up to now. We are not in a postmodern era of film, and we're not in a modern era of film. We are in what's called a metamodern film. What metamodernism does is it takes elements of postmodernism and modernism and it combines them together to create a whole entirely new film. So the consequence, and what do those films usually look like? Well, they're usually silly, they're usually weird, they usually also ironic, and they usually subvert expectations, but they are also usually films that have a lot of sincerity and they are usually highly optimistic, okay? And the idea within the film is that, you know, everything is meaningless, right? Life means nothing, and therefore life means everything, right? Instead of the postmodern idea, which is that just that life means nothing and that's the end of it. The meta modern response to this, okay, because life means nothing, because there is no inherent meaning to life, you have to create meaning. That means that every single scrap of existence that you have is extremely important. And so what you'll see often, like within meta modern films, is something that's called oscillation, which means it'll go from being really ironic and trying to subvert your expectations to being really meaningful and being a very empowering neighbor. So I'll give you an example. So Wes Anderson is an example of a director who does this. Some films that have come out in the past 10 years that do this are in 2023. The film that won the Academy Award was Everything Everywhere All at Once. That's a meta-modern film. The Shape of Water, that's a meta-modern film. Birdman, that was 2015 that won the Academy Award. That's a meta-modern film. What we are seeing amongst like films that are winning these awards like more frequently today than was true in the past is these films are weird yet hopeful. They are ironic and yet optimistic. They acknowledge and subvert expectations, but they give you something to smile at the end. And I think what's happening, frankly, it's not just that like films of the today are more diverse and like we can talk about that. I think it's also, frankly, that films are weirder than they used to be.
I don't.
And they're weirder than they used to be. That's why. That's
okay,
a big reason
I
why.
just reject that premise. I don't think that's why. I think that we like all these examples that you've given. We can give examples of movies people enjoyed in each of these categories, whether it be modern, postmodern, metamodern, what have you. A good movie, right, is a good movie. A good story is a good story, right? And yes, you can tell a good story in a modernist film. You can tell a good story in a postmodernist film. You can tell a good story in a metamodernist film. I think the rot goes, or the reason that there is less interest in stories is something we touched on at the very beginning, but we kind of glossed over, and we've gone through all sorts of things till now. And you guys can correct me if you think I'm wrong. But the reason is that movies have become much more of a product than they have. It's become more formulaic than it has where it used to be more of an endeavor from the heart. And I think that that's all. There was always formulaic movies. That's always true, right? But they didn't capture the imagination in the way that something that was from the heart did. And we're seeing is, and I think Maeve touched on this a little bit, is that there's less and less risk taking from movie studios, the big movie studios and things. They've got their formula and they stick to their formula. And yes, there are indie films, and yes, there are things that you can see that still kind of buck the trend and are still kind of like amazing stories from the heart. But that is less now than it was, I would say, 20 years ago. Do you disagree or agree? I want to hear from May first, and then we'll go to Fairy Queen. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I haven't like seen every recent movie and like even popular movies in the last few years. I do agree that there's like something going on with storytelling. I think low budget movies are still doing a good job at trying to create interesting stories. I saw a movie recently called The Endless that dealt with the idea of time warp, but in this really interesting, non like
Maeve,
obvious
Maeve,
sci-fi way.
can I just say, you're like,
Yeah.
talking to you is like someone who just saw every single movie and all the cultural touchdowns, and you just all saw them all like within the last year. And you're like, oh
Yeah.
wow, have you guys seen this? Have you guys read Harry Potter? Did you guys hear it about Harry Potter?
Yes.
I just read it. It's great. Like, okay, yeah, we get it. But carry on. Sorry, I just had to.
Guess what? Yeah, I know. Yeah, but I do think like one of the reasons I suspect people have such a problem with the Gladiator 2 trailer, but they can't verbalize it because they kind of do, but they don't really know what they're saying. Is Gladiator was a 1999 movie, which was apparently the biggest year for movies. I mean, you had Matrix and Gladiator and loads of I think Black Hawk Down came out that year. I don't know, but there were a few other big, huge zeitgeist movies that came out in 1999. It was 2 years before the War on Terror, and it was like a happy time to be alive. And also, just for some reason, pretty good movies came out. And I think they have this nostalgia element as well, tied back to their own childhood. And they're like, Gladiator changed my life when I was 11. I went to the cinema, I saw Maximus Russell Crowe looking great. I saw him defeat a lion. And like, it's a fantastic movie. You can watch that now for the very first time as an adult and still have the same opinion of an 11-year-old in 1999. Like, it is a stand-up movie. It ages perfectly. But I think there's a shielding of our childhoods that people are also like really aware of. They don't want their kind of memories of something impactful being changed. And I think the outcry and the kind of like fear of losing that shows the emotional attachment we have to movies. So when people complain about like, oh, why are they talking about movies again as if it's real life? Well, it's like, why are you treating movies like they're your, I don't know, your friends or your like sisters or siblings? You have an attachment to them. You just don't want to say it because maybe it's not
This is a
cool. But that's what I
double-edged,
feel.
yeah, this is a double-edged sword because I think people recognize the attachment a lot of us have to a older IPs. When we were younger, we saw all the movies and the Ninja Turtles and all these IPs that we grew up on and we have a great nostalgia for. And I think that companies have realized that they can really cash in on nostalgia. And I think this has
Yeah.
led to a lot of resources being put into nostalgia projects rather than
Mhm.
new stories, new worlds, new ideas, new IPs. And I think that is another reason that movies are just less enjoyable these days is because
Well, you know what
I've
they
already
figured out?
seen, right? Just real quick,
Yeah.
I've already seen those stories. I've already seen them. They
Mm,
were great. I enjoyed them.
mhm,
I want novelty. I want something new and
mhm,
different. That's why everything everywhere all at once. Well, it had some things that were tropes, metaverse, all these things, right? It was just at
mhm,
its heart a different telling of a tale. And I understand there's nothing new under the
mhm.
sun in a very real way, but you can do it in such a way that does make it unique, that does make it novel. And I think we've lost that art somewhere. But finish your thought and then Fairy Queen.
Well, I was just going to say that I think they figured out there was a groundbreaking TV show that came out 10 years ago that I think changed the game for everybody. And it was called Stranger Things. Stranger Things captured the nostalgia of the 80s and gave it to like an audience who didn't even grow up then. And people were like, oh my God, this is great. This is reminding me of a childhood I never had because I'm a
I
90s kid.
hated it.
But the 80s, oh my God,
It
look at
was a
it.
great
And it had
show,
a
but I
really
hated what it's
interesting
done. But go ahead.
Oh, it had a really interesting storyline on top of it. So it captured nostalgia, gave it a sci-fi mix, gave some interesting characters, created a good storytelling. It did what everyone was hoping, like, they could do. So now we have these Marvel movies who are trying to capture some nostalgia, but they're not really sure where they're capturing it from. Like when you think about Superman, that's a 60s thing, actually, technically. It could happen in 2024, but they're trying to capture some type of weird old comic book nostalgia and they're trying to reframe it. And I think that's happening over and over again because Stranger Things did it well, and everyone's trying to capture that moment back because they don't know what to do. And I feel people are confused about where we stand with storytelling. And also, the other thing is making a contemporary movie even that exciting to people because people don't want to live in right now for many reasons. They don't want to have a pandemic movie. They don't want to have a Donald Trump and Biden movie. They don't want to have a current 2024 movie. They want to see something a little bit more hopeful. Is it a case where maybe our world right now is not to storytellers hopeful enough to write about? Maybe that's another like way. Yeah, I don't know.
Go ahead, Fairy Queen. You've been trying to get in.
Yeah, so a couple of things about the modernism point. I think it is relevant, and I think that it ties into the nostalgia that like both of you are talking about right now. Because I don't think that the only response to the postmodern era, like in like the it really ended probably in like roughly the 90s, the 2000s. I don't think the only response to that has been the meta modernism. Okay, I also think the other is a subsequent response, and this is me saying it, is the nostalgia route. Okay, and we can see we have a lot of evidence to prove this. First of all, like if you look at like Disney films and you look at like the number of like sequels that has come out, like it's absurd. Okay, let's see, like I'm just looking right here. Okay, so Inside Out 2, that came out in June like of this year. Okay, the Beach Boys, let's see, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Christmas, Cabin Fever. Okay, We have Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. That was 2023. We have Peter Pan and Wendy in 2023. We have, let's see, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Roderick Rules. That was 2022. Night at the Museum. I cannot pronounce this. Kamunra Rises Again. We have Lightyear 2022. We have Diary of a Wimpy Kid in 2021. We have so many examples of sequels or like rehashings of old movies being repackaged and being sold. We are seeing a lot of that happening, especially with Disney, but also I probably with other companies too, because it's working with Pixar and like other corporations too. So I would agree with you. I think that nostalgia is killing movies, and I think that the reason why you're seeing so much nostalgia is in response, frankly, to this long era of like postmodern film and like in media that we had for a very long time. And to make the point about modernism, like why I think that's happening, this is just simply true. Modernist films are easier to watch. They are more accessible to the average person. It is way easier for you as a viewer to sit down and to watch a very straightforward narrative about a good guy, a bad guy, killing and speaking truth to power. And that's an easy film to watch. It doesn't require you to do the same level of
You can
cognitive
watch
work
it while
as
you're watching this.
well, it's not the same. Like if you're watching, like, and I like these films as well, like Everything Everywhere All at Once, The Shape of Water. Like when you're thinking about these films, you have to think, okay? Because it's confusing, right? 1 minute, right, they are in like the laundromat and the mother and daughter are talking to each other. And the next minute, you're seeing the couple that's dancing together with their fingers that have become hot dogs. You're seeing the bagel that is the center of the universe, right? This is a film that is so weird that it forces you to have to look at the film. It defamiliarizes yourself with media. And for most people, right, it's exactly what I said before with like with what the films that people want to watch, okay? Like it is a higher cognitive demand to ask people to watch a meta modern film or even a postmodern film as opposed to a modern film. And so it's not just simply that we're returning to nostalgia just because like you miss this because it's an attack on your childhood. I think that that is part of what's happening, right? But it's also because I think people are tired of complex narratives. I think people are tired, of like having to fish and filter out who they are, right? When this is a story that like I heard like from like people that like were immigrants who came overseas like to the United States, and when they first came into the store to go buy a loaf of bread, this is a story I heard from a friend, right? He walked into the store. There are 8,000 loaves of bread, right? How on earth are you supposed to choose which loaf of bread you're going to pick out of the aisle? And you're going to, oh, you can choose anything, right? Well, that leaves you, right, with like huge like anxiety as to what it is you're supposed to pick. And so I think a lot of these narratives and a lot of this nostalgia that we're seeing is demonstrating the cultural anxiety a lot of people are having in discerning their identity and discerning who they are in an age where we are constantly subverting expectations and where the gods of modernism have fallen to a degree. So like, and I'll give you an example of this. So just to give you an example, and we talked about this before in the last show, these were some of the biggest television shows, right? Like in like the past 20 years, Game of Thrones, The Sopranos, House of Cards. Okay. What are all of these shows about? These shows are all doing roughly the same thing, or Mad Men too, excuse me. They all do roughly the same thing, right? We have an institution, we have a story, right? That is often heavily grounded in the history. It's grounded in respect. For The Sopranos,
Ah,
it's the
yes, the
Godfather.
history
It's the
of
vision
Game
of
of
the
Thrones. I remember when the Targaryens rose
well,
and took over the American continent with their
hang
dragons.
on. Well, hang on. Like
Okay.
Game of Thrones, like even though it's not real, even though it is fiction, right? My understanding is that it's heavily inspired by history, by the War of the Roses between the Tudors. It's heavily inspired by
Also,
Cleopatra, by like the
Breaking
history of
Bad
ancient
was
Egypt.
way better, way bigger than House of Cards, and I think even Mad Men.
Well, but that may well be, but the point is, right, that these different shows, you have an institution, you find out that the institution is bunk, right? You know that the institution is no good. You know the thing that is being presented on the screen is flawed in somehow, and the male protagonist is struggling or is manipulating the fact that it's flawed, right? And is showing you what things are really like behind the scenes, right? And then what eventually happens is that character has to sort of recoup their identity
Five
and figure
dollars.
out who they are in this mess.
Yeah,
That's what
$5
happens with
from
it.
Time Watch 11 to say, Wick, tell them to watch Hotel Del Luna on Netflix. I bet they both love it. Well, there you go. I haven't seen it, but Hotel Del Luna, check it
Lilina.
out, gang. But I just have one question for you. Well, more than one, but one to start with, Fairy Queen. Who's the protagonist in Game of Thrones?
I mean, I think that's a good question. Like, it's difficult to say, right? I mean, that's one of the appeals of Game of Thrones. This is a soap opera, right? It's like, I mean, it's a glorified soap opera. You're going from character to character, right? You could very easily say Jon Snow. You could say Daenerys Targaryen, right? It's not quite the same as like, it's different in that regard,
But you just
but it's
had this
still,
whole spiel, right, about how the institution's bad and the protagonist is coming to think. Like,
yeah.
I don't think it.
No, but
With your example,
the institutions that are shown like within Game of Thrones, it is royalty, it is knighthood. It's not just one institution that's being challenged, right? It's what does it mean to be a good king? What does it mean to be a knight in shining armor? What does it mean to be a damsel in distress? What does it mean to be a leader of a nation? These are it's critiquing
so
a
the
number of different institutions.
protagonist in Game of Thrones, as a story as a whole, is, for my money, Daenerys. She is the protagonist. She is the one that is the
Well, I
center of
mean,
the
she is
story.
a protagonist, but she's not the only protagonist.
Sure,
I mean,
there
like
are others
there are
in
a
the
lot,
story,
but
but
there
the
are
story
lots of
centers around her journey. Her journey as a wayward outcast, right? And
I mean,
coming, and how her coming, like, to her ancestral homeland, how she handles that, and how the people around her handle it,
well,
and
you forget that
everything like
winter was
that.
also coming, okay? And in more ways than one, right? Like that's another central part of the story is Jon Snow, right? It's Jon Snow's ascent to power. It's Jon Snow struggling also with like his journey, right? And he also discovers that an institution is bunk. It's just the institution that he struggles with is the what is it like the Knights the what is it the Night's Watch? That's what it's called, right?
Sure.
Like with the that's what it's Castle Black, right? He believes, right, this is his chance to finally rise above being perceived as a bastard in Westeros. And then he goes, and what does he find out? He finds out that when you take the black, your brothers in arms are rapists and they stole things. He finds out that they're terrible people.
He
He
knew
goes
that
out.
going in. Like, that's the whole point of the, like, no,
No, he
even from
didn't.
book one, right? Even from, yes, he did. Yes,
In the
he
movie,
did.
I'm talking about the show. In the show, at the very beginning of the show, before he goes, right, he's like, oh, this is going to be great. And then Tyrion Lannister makes fun of him. Jaime Lannister makes fun of him, right? They mock him like when he's out in the back, like outside of the feast, and he's slicing up like the dummy with the sword. He's saying, oh, you want to go to the wall, I hear. You're going to fight all of the ghouls and ghosts across the realm. Well, good luck with you, son, right? And then he defends himself, says, yes, it is a good thing, and I will do a great job. And slowly, that idea of what that is deconstructed and revealed to be a lie. It's revealed to be a lie slow, like as within the first season, he finds out that it's not true.
Okay, look, I'm fighting the temptation to just argue with Game of Thrones about Game of Thrones with you all night. You've said a lot of wrong things, but I'm gonna let you be wrong. It's okay. I'm gonna
Thank you.
draw back from that
I
temptation.
will also let you be wrong too.
Well, thank you. I appreciate
The feeling
that.
is mutual.
Okay, but I guess my question, here's my problem with all of this, is it feels extraneous that, sure, those are also things that happened in cinema and storytelling and things like that, but it was in response to a symptom of the very basic thing that has happened in the last 20 years. And I'll repeat it again. It's the commercialization of art in a way that's always been with us, but has been elevated over and over and over again and brought to a head in the age of social media and the age of being able to measure this data in a way that we just didn't have the formula and the tools for it before. And we can see, and companies have glommed onto these formulas that work. Like, the Marvel movies make a lot of money. A lot of money. They know if they put out a Marvel movie, they don't have to do a lot of cool writing and stuff. Most Marvel movies will make a ton of money. Now, is this changing with like Madam Web and some of the recent things? It might be, but for the last 10 years, that was just the case. And again, I think it isn't because of postmodernism or modernism or any of that. It's, at the end of the day, nostalgia for comic books, and the drawing into fandoms and these types of things, which has also been a reason. Look, fandoms have ruined movies and they've ruined politics. This idea that creators have to bow down to the fandoms in order to, right, never take a risk. They can never deviate from what the fandom wants. It's really killing our creativity here. Now, there are certain things that you should, if you have a beloved franchise, you should pay attention to what has happened before in the franchise. But I think that it's a double-edged sword because a lot of fandoms hold the franchise hostage. And sure, we can see Star Wars number 238, right? That's just the same fucking story as we've already fucking seen. Or we could try to do something different. Now,
Yeah.
different doesn't always mean better. Look at The Acolyte, for example. However, I think trying new things within a franchise can be very great. Mandalorian was a great, or Rogue One was a deviation from the formula, but it did very, very well. And I think that, I think those are a much bigger driver than modernism, postmodernism.
Well, it's that the nostalgia is a response to all of this. That's what I'm saying, right? Like there was a reason. It's the reason for why the nostalgia exists within it. And I would agree with you. I do think that like it's a big problem when fandoms like take a hold of a series. I think that happened with Star Wars. It's happened with a lot of series. It happens often, very frequently. And I think that it's not just happening, frankly, in film and media. I think it's happening across culture. I think we're seeing it a lot. That desire to return to a distant past, a past that like we idealize as being idyllic, as being free of problems, where roles are clearly defined and where you don't have to sift through the messy complexity of life. That's being expressed in some really troubling ways. And one of the ways that we're all familiar with,
Is cinema fascistic or fascistic? Oh my god, it's so funny. Reclaim the past.
Is it?
Honestly, well, frankly, like that's sort of my concern. Like whenever I hear people that are really nostalgic and like only want to watch really nostalgic films over and over again, you're absolutely right. I do think there's kind of a sort of fascistic current underneath that, right? And I'm not the only one who thinks that. Before you say I'm insane, okay? I'm not the only one who thinks that. I would point you towards there's an episode of South Park, okay? This was during like one of their later seasons. I think it was like when they were doing serial seasons.
You're talking about member berries?
Yes, and remember there's a scene like where they talk about the member berries where I think it's Mr. Garrison, I'm not sure who it is. It might be Randy or Mr. Garrison. He's on the couch, right? And he's eating the member berries. And the member berries keep saying things like, wasn't it better when the old Star Wars was here? Wasn't it better when, gay people couldn't be married? Wasn't life better when women didn't have any rights? Wasn't it better when weren't things so much simpler? Weren't things so much better? Like that's an actual scene that was in that cartoon. It's not just me that's saying it. And we are seeing examples of that, frankly, being played out in politics, in social discourse. I think a lot of it, this trend is frankly driving the red pill in a lot of conversations about incel. I think it is a cultural response to all of this.
Driving the movie industry?
I think that like it's impacting the movie industry maybe
How?
a little bit.
Give me an example.
I mean, like we're talking about sequels, like the popularity of sequels and why people are creating sequels, why they are creating.
I'm not a fan of sequels and the nostalgia thing, but I would never say it was a symptom of fascism.
Well, we're not saying that like people are. Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I think there's like a right wing movie like trope as well, and like Tim Pool, and I obviously no time for Tim Pool, and I don't listen to him, so I don't even know how this even came on my For You page in some way. Was talking about how actually people think the right wing don't want women in movies, but how that's actually wrong. Like how there are very famous right wing movies that have prominent female characters, but they're done in a really special way where it's not in your face. And I think that was really interesting. He mentioned Top Gun. He mentioned that Live, Die, Repeat, the one with Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt. These are very beloved movies for right-wing people in terms of what they showcase is like the American hero, libertarian values, being a cool.
Yeah,
by the way, you can like these movies and not be right-wing.
What was libertarian values about Edge of Tomorrow? I'm just really curious what you think that was.
That was more of like the hero, patriotism hero, like America saves the planet. Like Tom Cruise being American, Emily Blunt was English, but like it was all about the Americans saving the planet. Which, like, by the way, I have no problem with America Saves the Day, but let's be real, America saves the day quite a lot. in these movies.
And in real life too,
America's
but
always
fair
saving the
enough.
day.
Yeah, that's just being
There's
historically
actual
accurate. But carry
military
on.
reasons. I mean, okay. You want to go there? You want to go there? Okay. There's reasons you could say, well, we have a big military, so does China. But remember that sci-fi movie that China made where China saves the day? And it was like China saves the day, and it was like like a Chinese American sci-fi movie, and it was like so odd because they just copied American tropes, but because it was China saves the day, it just fits so strangely because it was like, oh well, this makes sense, but
Which
instead of the
movie was it?
American
I'm
flag,
just
it's a
curious.
Chinese flag. It was a Chinese sci-fi movie, and it only came into headlines because it was basically really funny about how they made basically a Western movie about the planet being like attacked by aliens or some asteroid or something. But instead of America saving everybody, it was China saves everybody. And that was just so obscure for us to even understand. It was like laughable. But of course they're going to make a movie like that. But the fact that they did it was so laughable. Where do aliens land? America. Who do the aliens want to talk to? The
I
American
think the
president.
reduction, like this Edge of Tomorrow reductionist, like that to boil it down to America saves the day as a
You're the one
concept of the
saying
movie, it's just not. It's just missing the whole point of the
you're
show.
you're the one saying that right wing is reductionist. I have respect for the right wing, mister. So I'll
Wait,
just say
no,
I'm
hold
not saying
on.
right wing equals
Wait,
reductionist.
oh,
But I am saying so when Tim Pool was talking about women in movies and how right wing movies or movies that the right wing enjoy have women in them in even powerful places, what he was trying to say is when the left or when he thinks like Lady Ghostbusters comes along and he's like, you're putting it in our face that like we're left, we're woke, we're SJW, but hey, we have women in our movies, we just like don't brandish them this way, in this tokenistic way. And because I guess we're not doing that, it looks like we don't have them or we're not celebrating women in movies. But the fact that you're trying to push this agenda like we don't have it or this is anti-right wing, that's not actually true. And I felt for the first time a little bit of empathy towards Tim Pool's people, but not really. It ended there because I realized, yeah, we are politicizing films quite a lot. And there are films like Indiana Jones is a libertarian movie because he's like a cool libertarian cowboy saving the day. We don't have a problem with Indiana. So it's
Indiana
just like,
Jones
I mean, the
libertarian?
politicization.
I think so.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I agree. That's a
It's been a
that's a
while
base
since I've
take, and I
seen
like it.
the
The
He's a cowboy. He
libertarian
saves the day.
cowboy. I love that. That's
Yeah, but
awesome.
okay,
Yeah.
libertarian
Yeah.
cowboy isn't whatever. You could be
He
a
takes libertarian
Democratic
is taking
cowboy
the
or a
rules into
Republican
your own.
cowboy. You can be all sorts of cowboys. The cowboys aren't libertarian.
Yeah, I guess so.
necessarily.
But I guess the idea of old school American libertarian values is the maverick man who does his own thing, who follows his own moral compass, who has the means to enact his own bravery. And like if he wants something, he gets it. He goes
Oh
off and
yeah,
gets it. He doesn't
Indiana
ask for
Jones is
help.
a
He doesn't
government
ask for
employee.
permission.
What are you talking about, libertarian?
He's an archaeologist who goes
Who
around shooting
goes
up
and
Nazis every now and
he
then.
takes artifacts and puts them in museums. That
Yeah,
doesn't
he's an
sound libertarian
archaeologist,
to
yeah.
me.
I mean, he swings by Egypt and just takes what he wants when he wants it. I mean, there's nothing wrong about that, but like that's what he's
It
doing.
sounds
Like being a
colonialist.
libertarian is not
Doesn't
bad.
sound
You can
like
be a libertarian and be a
libertarian.
good guy.
Anyway, but
Well, like libertarian cowboy.
fair enough.
So, but yeah, I mean, just to end that point, the right
$2
wing.
from Total
Yeah,
Emergency
go on.
to ask, could I get a definition of fascism? I'm so confused.
Sure. So let's see if I can find this one definition. So there's a very it's historically, like, it's very, very difficult to define. Like, I think there's a quote from Hannah Arendt, who like wrote the defining work on totalitarianism, which is, I think it was her, that it was either her or Timothy Snyder, that said trying to define fascism is like trying to nail jelly on the wall. It's often like very difficult to do. But here, I can do that for you. So let me see if I can find it really
While you're
quickly.
finding it, I just have a quick follow-up question also to Maeve.
Yeah.
Since you think Indiana Jones is libertarian, do you think Batman is fascist?
I've never seen Batman. I've only seen Indiana.
Hold on. What is going on? You've never seen any Batman movies, any of them?
Nope.
Okay.
I'm not talking about Batman here. I'm talking about Indiana. An arguably better movie because I've seen it.
I can't.
If I've seen it, it's probably
deal
better.
with you. How am I? What am I supposed to like? We're here to critique film, and you've never seen a Batman movie, not one. Have you seen a Batman
Hey,
movie,
Mister,
Fairy
have you
Queen?
seen Girl Interrupted? Have you seen
I love
Emily?
Batman.
It's
I love
amazing.
Batman. Are you kidding me? Like our family has cases of Batman films. I probably could talk about Batman all night. I grew up wanting to be Batman, okay? I know Batman. I know him so well that I know the voice actor name is Kevin Conroy, and I know that he died. How dare you question my love for Batman, Wick? How dare you? How
I'm
dare you?
not. I'm just. I'm questioning
Yeah,
everything. How can
sure.
someone not see? Anyway, whatever.
Well, I have like the definition, and it is going to take a quick minute. So I'm going to. This is for those of you who like want to look up the article that I'm looking at. It's the title of the website is called The Imaginative Conservative, and the article is called Fascism: A Precursor to Modernism, and it's written by Bill Krause, and it was published on April 17th, 2012. So you can look it up and you can find. I would urge you to scroll down and go down to the part that says the major tenets of fascism. So I'm going to very quickly say it. So the first one is imminence. Okay. Imminence is the first tenet of fascism, okay? It is the practical and violent resistance to transcendence, okay? So let's see, let me see if I can scroll down. So essentially, there was a movement backwards towards Germany's pagan past, and with it, an ethics based on nature, the needs of the community, and assertion of the will. The existence of only one transcendent God, according to the fascists, drained the immanent world of its spiritual significance. They sought to restore the values of ancient myths and primitive cultures. Moss writes, the mystical and the occult were taken both as an explanation and solution to man's alienation from modern society, culture, and politics, okay? So oftentimes, and here's an example, and I could give you like a historical example of this, which would be Voltsy. So one of the things that was often like when Germans were forcing Jews to get on the trains to go, they would force them to write postcards like back to their families, and they would say, "I'm going to Voltsy." Voltsy is like a fixture of German folklore. It meant like I'm going to paradise. Okay, I'm going to heaven. I'm going to a wonderful place. Okay, so there was a movement
Okay.
like within fascism to try to root it within, natural, historic,
We're
the
gonna
strength of man in the face of modernity.
just for the sake of the conversation, we'll link it the definition because we're gonna
Well,
bog down. And he only paid
okay.
$2. He doesn't get
Well,
this.
yeah. Okay, well,
He only gave $2. That's not worth $2.
okay.
Well,
Well,
for the sake of this conversation, yeah, I might just also say, like, I was only joking when I brought in like the mythical past as a fascistic point of
Okay, so it
movies,
was a joke.
but I think there
Great,
is.
awesome. We can move
It
on.
was. I wasn't saying that Indiana is fascist or that Batman is fascist. And I know you and Fairy Queen made the point that like it's the idea of remembering that the mythical past of gloriful times, like make
Mhm,
America great again. This idea of going backwards. It doesn't
mhm.
mean that we're saying that sequels are Nazis.
Yeah, exactly. And what I am saying is not that like all of these
It's
things
only
are
like
secretly fascist, but what I'm saying is like what I am saying is, and this is what like South Park is saying, is that when we're seeing a broad cultural trend that is constantly pushing for nostalgia, that is constantly pushing sequels, that is like what we're seeing en masse, what that looks like that is something to be cautious of. Okay. That is a sign because unfortunately, when you return back to the past, you do get memories of grandma baking you cookies. You do get memories of the first time you went down to sit down to watch Toy Story. But we also remember a time where gay people were not able to be married, a time where the Violence Against Women Act did not exist, a time where a lot of the luxuries of modern life were not present. And unfortunately, that reality can get lumped in with the good stuff of the past. And we're seeing as right now a lot of people advocating a return to the past, right? And they are advocating that what made the past so good was all of the bad stuff that we have been trying to like progress away from. And so like and I'm not that and I'm not to be very very clear, I'm not saying that like a specific film is secretly a fascist film. What I'm saying is this broad cultural trend that we're seeing across all of these films and this broad cultural trend that is constantly emphasizing nostalgia is one that we should be cautious of because it is exactly as what Maeve said. It is a callback to that is the
Let
fascist
me
undercurrent that we're talking
let
about.
me ask something to maybe like a combo breaker here. Okay. So $2 $2 more for Turtle Emergency to see Feel Strained, but I get you now. Thank you. Thank you for the additional $2. And gang, if you're liking the content, please give me more money. I could use more money. Okay, but a question for both of you. I want to start with Maeve, and then we'll go Fairy Queen. Maybe a combo breaker question to get us out of this loop, right? What's your favorite movie in the last couple of years, and your least favorite movie from the last couple of years? Just curious.
I mean, oh my God, and now I have to think if I've like what movies I've liked that have been made or like
Yeah,
released
in
in
the
the last
last
two
couple,
years.
like I'm not gonna hold you to two. It could be like 3 or 4, right?
Oh yeah, well, okay, yeah, a couple of years. God, oh my God. This is like that moment where someone asks you your name and you're like, what is my name?
Well, you can start with your
What is a
least if
movie?
you
What
want.
is
Do you have
one
a movie you
movie?
absolutely
But
hated that's been made in the last couple of years?
Well, I mean, like, there's movies I've just avoided because I know I wouldn't have liked them. The Western Flower one, the Scorsese one, couldn't deal with that. I couldn't also deal with Oppenheimer. I was just thinking about when you said Oppenheimer is really boring, and just one quick point. Have you noticed that in movies, right? You're either having these pretentiously long, 3-hour nothing movies about some old director just having their vanity moment, and then you're just having the other extreme of like a kind of a shit show of guns. And it's like, where is the middle ground here? Like, we used to have more middle ground movies that were like 2 hours, a good movie, I don't know, like Gladiator, that were made and people liked. Instead, we're having like awkwardly badly made B movies that have like 300 million budget, or these 3-hour long epics of nothing. Have you, like, I don't know, is that just me or I don't know?
Yeah.
No, I don't think you're entirely wrong. I can think of
Like, we
there
need to
are
get gulags for these people. Like, what are they doing?
there
Like, what is
are
Scorsese
segments of
doing?
movies that I like, to be clear, right? Like 2001 Space Odyssey. I liked that movie. I enjoyed that. But there was like a 20-minute sequence that didn't need to be there of them, like, I think crashing or something, or it was just 20 minutes. And I'm sitting there like waiting for
Yeah.
something to happen, but it's just 20 minutes of that. And I'm like, okay, I get it. I understand. We don't have to have this. And I can understand that I've seen movies which are just that. There's no real substance. It wants to be artsy fartsy, and it's just that. And they're hard to
Yeah, yeah,
watch.
but they had acid, like they were just new to acid back then. So this was like their first kind of like psychedelic, crazed out, like cool movie, like 2001
No, to
Space
be clear,
Odyssey or
gang,
whatever.
everyone yell at me. I liked 2001. I liked the film. I just didn't like that part. That part
Yeah, it's
was
a great film.
silly. But I
Yeah.
want to, while you're
It was
thinking
made to
about
be
it,
stoned for.
right? While you're thinking about maybe a favorite movie, I want to ask Fairy Queen the same question. Go ahead.
So I have my list of favorite movies here, and if anybody ever wants to see my list, okay, you can ask. I'm not going to give everything on it because it's very long, but here are a couple of my favorite films that have come out recently. One of them is Lady Chatterley's Lover. That recently came out on Netflix. That is a beautiful movie, okay? For those of you who don't know, that's based off of a different book. It was published by, I think it's D.H. Lawrence. He published it and it was actually very scandalous when he first published it. It's a very sexually provocative like book. Okay, it was banned for pornography, for obscenity. There was a trial over whether or not it should be there. Um, but the book and like the film, well, maybe the book is actually worse than this is one of the rare cases where I think the book is actually worse than the film. But the film is beautiful. The film is a very sexual film, like it is like you will see sex in the film, like it's very explicit, but it's not a pornographic film. And what I mean by that is like it is a film that really portrays beauty, it portrays love, it portrays desire between the male protagonist, the gamekeeper, and between Lady Chatterley, but it does it in a way that isn't pornified, okay? That isn't gross. It doesn't feel objectifying. It feels like when there's a scene like in that film where you're seeing both of them standing by a tree and everything is green and they're embracing and it looks frankly like a painting. It looks like a painting of the Garden of Eden where they're standing together. Like it's something that, and the reason why I like that film is because we're seeing a trend where there is less sex, where there's less portrayals of sex. We know, like from studies and like, well, from not from a study, but from a survey of the Guardian that came out recently that said that Generation Z wants to see less sex and less nudity, less sexual portrayals in media. So I really loved that this movie was able to be a sexual movie without being a pornified sort of pornographic sort of thing. And I hope that you all will understand what I mean if you go to see it. Like if you're of age, obviously, but like please go to see it. It's a beautiful, beautiful movie. It is an example of a movie I think that beautifies and gives an example of a beautiful portrayal of sexuality, which frankly is I think what our culture needs. Okay, not less portrayals of sex, but better portrayals of sex, which is one of the reasons I
what
really
was
like the
that
film.
the plot of the movie? I'm just curious.
So the plot of the movie, it's very good actually. It's about a woman whose name is Lady Chatterley, and she marries, Lord Chatterley. Okay, like he's an English lord. This is like about World War One. It's where
Jane
it's located.
Austen. Gotcha. Carry on.
Well, it's World War One. Like it's about like 19. What is it? 1920s. Let's say it's about that time period. Like 1914, I think, is when the First World War started. But anyway, so he comes back from the war, and the husband is injured. Okay, the husband is injured, and because of his injury, he is unable to make love to his wife. Okay, and not only is he unable to make love to his wife, but importantly, he can't provide an heir to the ground. They live in a castle. They live
So
like a
he
huge
gets a
mansion.
bull to help him?
That's big. Well, he tells her, have an affair, right? And conceive a child. And I don't want to know who it is, but please go off and do this. And throughout the series, right, he is neglectful of her. He not only is he unable to make love to his wife, but all he wants to do is talk about his literature, his books. He wants to talk his magazine, but he is emotionally
How dare
neglectful of his
men
wife.
have hobbies?
He
But carry on.
doesn't, he doesn't eat dinner. He doesn't love her. He's not kind. He's not caring. It also shows that throughout the course of the film, he becomes increasingly cruel to the local workers that like work like in the local town. Like he's talking about like firing like half the people in the factory because he has a new invention that he wants to install. He has very little care for people of a lower class. And she does have an affair, partially because she's just so sick of him, because she hates him, because he's neglecting her throughout their marriage, and he's given her the okay. So she has an affair with the gamekeeper, and the gamekeeper is intelligent. Like he has books in his like cottage, like down the road, but he loves her. He makes love to her. They hold each other, like it is like he doesn't just intellectually acknowledge her, or he physically loves her with his entire being, right? And the love and the point of the show is that you have to have a mixture of both when it comes to love. You have to have, on the one hand, you have to inspire the intellect, the mind, right? You have to appeal to like the person, their intellect, but you also have to appeal to them as physical beings. And caring about the person's physical life is just as important as it is caring about their
Thank you.
intellectual life.
What about your least favorite movie?
My least favorite movie?
Yes.
Honestly, it was Beauty and the Beast live action. Not the original, not the cartoon, but the live action like one. The live action one. I remember I
Really? You
saw
didn't
that.
like that?
I remember I saw it, and at first I was kind of excited, but then like as the film progressed, I actually began to cry. Like I actually broke down in tears like in the film. And I remember I left that film like sobbing into my hands, and I just felt not only did I feel incredibly let down by the film, but I felt ashamed walking out of that film in a way that I did not feel like when I finished watching the cartoon. That was probably one of the worst. That actually probably isn't the worst film I've ever seen. Like I've seen
I
worse
hate to
films.
keep asking you questions. I don't mean to poke at you or anything, but what caused that reaction from? I remember seeing the live action. I think it was okay. What made you cry about it?
I suppose like I should probably just say that for me, I really held the original cartoon in extremely high regard. I loved the original cartoon. I thought the cartoon, for those of you who don't know, has a genuinely extremely like moving and touching story behind the creation of the film. So the story of the film, like of Gaston, and he's busting into the tower, right? And it was written by a man dying of AIDS. Like that was the storyline was written by him. And so like when you watch the film, a lot of the ostracization that Beast experiences when he's locked away in the tower, he's not able to talk to anyone. He is not able to have relationships with anyone else. He is completely isolated because of how monstrously he feels. This was inspired by the actual feelings of a man who was dying of AIDS, literally. And that's why the film is as moving as it is. It's because it's not just the story of a silly little cartoon. This is the story of a real living man who deeply struggled in a very fundamental way with feeling ostracized from everyone else, unable to touch anyone else, unable to hold anyone else, unable to be with anyone else. And that film, the romance of the film is that this man has this experience, and there is someone in the world who can come in and there can be a meeting of the minds and love can prosper and bloom. But when I watched the Beauty and the Beast live action series, that is not what that film is about. That film very much, like, it's exactly what I was saying earlier, like with Peter Dinklage and like him complaining about diversity, like in Snow White. That film obviously like made a lot of appeals to being diverse, right? It had LeFou is gay in the film, for instance, right? We know that like Belle, for instance, she's designing, she's extremely intelligent, she's designing the water wheel, right? The washing machine, like we have these examples throughout the film, but it becomes really clear that like the promise of the original cartoon is not held like in the live action film. The live action film is not that story. The live action film is a hollowed version of the original cartoon, meaning that like it doesn't genuinely care about like bringing the beast out of the tower and allowing them to participate in society. What it really is this is a corporate slapstick like on this original. Like, now you're laughing at me, you're so mean, Wick. Why do I tell you anything?
No, this is good. Please, this is very inappropriate to have the giggles, and I apologize. I do. I'm seriously
laughing at my tears.
I'm not laughing at your tears.
The entertainment value.
I remember my experience with Beauty and the Beast, right? Because I saw it when I was a kid. I saw the cartoon, right? And no, I wasn't aware of the backstory of all this. It's just I don't.
Me either.
No, yeah. No, I know. I'm just trying to get like. I don't know if a movie has ever, right? A movie adaptation of a story has ever made me like that, and I'm just trying to understand it, but I apologize for laughing. That was
it's okay. No, it's okay. I mean, it was just I guess I felt like when I watched the film Beauty and the Beast the cartoon, I felt like kind of hopeful. I felt seen. I felt understood. I felt that this message, I'm not saying like I am a man like dying of AIDS like in the 90s. Okay, that's not what I'm saying. Okay, but
Did you identify more with Belle or the Beast?
With who? With
Belle or the Beast? Because it sounds like you identified a lot with the Beast.
I identified a lot with the Beast. I identified very strongly with the Beast. And I sort of identified like with Belle, but what I identified with Belle, like the thing that makes her special, a lot of people say it's because she's very smart, and I agree that that is true about her character, but it's really her compassion. It's her compassion towards Maurice, her father, right? Who is a kook, right? But he's an adorable kook. It's her compassion towards, the poor inanimate objects, who now are servants, going around creating feasts, right? It's her compassion towards the beast. It's really love and compassion is what defines Belle as a character, and compassion towards people who legitimately are struggling and have less than she does. That's what defines her as a character. That is not what defines like Emma Watson as a character. What defines and so when I watching like this live action film, it sort of seems to me that like the fact that the film was reinterpreted in such a hackneyed way meant that the creators and the directors of the film did not take the original messaging. That was not the message that they took away. And more importantly, it's not the message that most people took away from the film, that I took away, which made me feel very lonely and very ostracized and very sad. And, I felt kind of heartbroken, like after watching the film, I felt like I felt very alone in the world after watching that film. So I felt I don't even know how to, and it's sort of silly, I know, to like have that big of an attachment like to a film, right? But it was like legitimately that film, like it's not just important to me because it's fun or because it's a fixture of like my.
I'm sorry, Testicle Johnson. I'll read that super chat in a minute. I'm sorry. Go on.
But yeah, no, it was a film that was like very, very special to me. It's still very special and important to me. But now I know that it is a special experience that maybe it's not unique to me. It's probably not. Like there are probably other people that feel like that. But the fact that like it was.
No, I get what you're saying, and I think that I have not seen a movie like that, but I have read books that have made me cry. Right? One of the more touching stories to me that I've ever read. It was a book, it was a fantasy book, right? You know, it was called The Eyes of God by John Marcos. And the whole story was about a man, two men who come from remarkably different backgrounds. One is a heir to a throne, the other grew up in abject poverty, how they formed a bond, became friends, and then a woman tested the bonds of friendship, and really kind of put a wedge between them as brothers.
Uh-oh.
And
Yeah.
it's an
Yoko breaking the
interesting,
band.
yeah, it's a timeless story, right? Like, but the way it was
Uh-oh.
told and with the fantasy tropes surrounding it, it was a really powerful book to me. The whole story. That was the first in the
Yeah.
series, and um, the whole series had a similar theme of just, it was one of the first books I've read that really explored what it is to have relationships that weren't of a romantic nature, but were of a very intimate nature, if that makes sense. And not just
Yeah.
between a king and his servant, but between a king and his kingdom, between a protector of the realm who has to make hard choices of, well, where does his priorities lie with the person he loves or his duty. And I think those were very powerful tales. It was and like nostalgia may be at play here. I was like 15 when I read it, but it was a
Yeah.
very great story anyway. But
Yeah.
let me read this
Yeah.
super chat, and I apologize in advance for the super chat.
So good.
Testicle Johnson for $10.
Of
Do you
course,
think
Testy.
Belle was disappointed when you got used to having her back blown out by Beastcock, and then he transformed into a man,
Oh.
and she had to settle for his pathetic human cock? Catfishing? Question mark. Thank you for the $10. But
Yeah.
we are kind of winding down. But I want to hear some last thoughts from Maeve, because Maeve's been pretty quiet, and I want to get. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you thought we should have when it comes to media? Go ahead.
I mean, there's like loads of things I could definitely like talk about in another kind of way. I mean, I love post 9/11 war movies. I think that's really interesting to talk about American consciousness like through their war movies after 9/11 versus before 9/11, completely different movies. Black Hawk Down versus like American Sniper is a different movie. But and I was just thinking about when you were like movies that make you cry, and like I was like, God, what's a movie I can think of that make me cry? Because there are a few. But the first movie I thought of is Platoon. That scene where they're like destroying that like Vietnamese village. Every time I can't watch that scene, I just burst into
Yeah.
tears while watching it. It's such a powerful, powerful movie making scene. That's a great movie. 70s movies were brilliantly made, very emotionally driven, even in conflict situations. So it's not just a boys' movie. Also, the last thing I'll say is the movie I watched recently that's very, very good is The Zone of Interest. It's a World War II concentration camp movie based on the commandant of Auschwitz, told through his family. So all you see is this very normal German family living their life right next to the camp, but you never see the camp, you never see the prisoners, you just hear them. And it's filmed in a horror movie-esque way where it's sound. Sound is what is scary, but the everyday banality of evil is shown so creepily through it. It's fantastic. I recommend anyone to watch that movie, The Zone of Interest. It's very powerful. You won't want to watch it again, and you won't feel good coming out of it. But it's a very, very well made movie.
I'll write it down.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, this has been a great discussion. I was really happy that we could chat about it because I feel like it's nice to discuss movies sometimes with people who kind of have interesting takes. And I know that like some of my takes may have been a bit like different to yours, Wick. I
It's
heard you getting
okay.
a bit
It's okay. That's why
annoyed.
we have you on. We
I
enjoy your takes. I enjoy Fairy Queen's takes, even though both of you are very wrong in very various different ways. But that's okay because I enjoy it. So thank you for being here.
just
But
love the fact
finish
that
up
you were like you were kind of making me feel like I was being a sexist for a while. And I was like, am I a
a little bit.
sexist?
It's okay though.
I was like, have to readjust the thinking. But yeah, no, it's been great. I was really happy to be here today.
No,
Yeah.
thanks for coming. Where can
Yeah.
people find you if they want to find you?
Nowhere. Don't look for me. Don't
Don't
ever
look for
find
me. A
me.
Wick
I'm
exclusive thing.
joking.
Well, no,
No, you
thank
can
you.
find me on Twitter. You can find me on Twitter. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I got a link in the YouTube's description. Check it out, gang. Thank you for being here. Really appreciate you. Um, we have to do this again sometime. I think we I enjoy talking politics, but to talk culture is something that it's interesting in a different way. And I really want to sit down and have just a debate with you, Fairy Queen, and I'll get to you in a moment, on Game of Thrones. I think that
Game of Thrones.
a lot of your
Okay.
takes on this are just wrong, and not
Okay.
only on like the focus of Game of Thrones and what it represents, but on some of the takes that you've expressed, not just tonight, but in other various formats on the characters of Game of Thrones. But we'll get into that
Okay.
maybe another day. But Fairy Queen, closing thoughts. Where can people find you? Go ahead.
Thank you so much for having me. And also, you guys should definitely check out Maeve. Okay. Her Twitter is great. Okay. She's great.
Aw.
Okay. Thank you. It was really great to be able to talk to you tonight. Like, it was really, really fun. Thank you both for a really fun conversation. You can find me at It's Me Fairy Queen on YouTube. And you can find me at It Me Fairy Queen on Twitter. So please give me a follow, give me a sub. I would really appreciate it. Thank you all very much for being here.
And please do. Both of these
Thanks so much,
ladies
Fairy
took their
Queen.
time out of their night to have spend time with us and argue about silly things and movies and give their takes. And I really appreciate them
Susie,
for
the
doing
most
so.
important things, this is what everyone should be talking about. This is the news.
True. True.
True.
Finally, important.
Very
This is the important topic that no one talks about. But yeah, yeah.
Okay, gang. We're gonna raid out to Admiral Gibbs. I want you to tell him this is a hate raid. Um, Tomorrow we're gonna be hosting a show on nuclear power. We're gonna have a debate between Soyaddle and his interlocutor, Drunken Dragons, I believe. And then, all right, look. And then on Thursday we're going to have Hutch on, and we're going to have several others, and we're going to be talking about extremism, political violence. When, if ever, is it okay? Should be great. For now though, wait, bye bye everyone. Bye bye.
Bye.